Daenerys stood at the prow of the ship, her silver-gold hair streaming in the briny wind. To any observer, she might have appeared calm as the horizon stretched blue and endless before her, but beneath her serene exterior raged 1,000 shifting emotions: hope, fear, a yearning for home that had kindled ever since her exile as an infant. She was returning to the land of her birth, the land her ancestors had conquered, the land her forefathers had ruled for centuries. Dragonstone rose before them in the distance, a grim silhouette carved from the obsidian rock. Her dragons, Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion, circled above, their shadows dancing on the waves, heralding her arrival with shrieks and roars that cut the sky. The rhythmic rush of surf against rock was the only sound that rivaled them. The unsullied, disciplined, and silent stood ready upon the deck, their spears braced. Grey Worm, loyal as ever, kept them in perfect formation, though there were no obvious enemies on the water this day. A spray of salt water misted across Daenerys' face, a welcome reprieve from the heat that radiated off Drogon, who had recently landed on a higher perch of the ship's rigging. Even though the day was temperate, the dragons emitted warmth like living furnaces. They were in constant motion, tails swishing, wings rattling the air. The mother of dragons had grown used to the sound of their constant movement, the low rumble in their throats, the acrid tang of burnt fish or charred meat on their breath. Her heart stuttered with adrenaline and purpose when the ship finally reached the harbor and the gangplank was lowered. This was her castle now, her ancestral seat. Taking that first step onto Dragonstone's shore felt like destiny culminating in a single, quiet moment. Though not many had come to greet her, she felt the presence of her lineage, the Targaryen ghosts lingering around every black stone. Missandei's measured footsteps behind her were a small comfort. The woman's unwavering loyalty had been a gift Daenerys cherished. They walked together across the dark sands, gray beneath the thinning sunlight, and approached the gates. The dragons soared overhead, their silhouettes passing over the imposing fortress ramparts. In the throne room, a cavernous hall of carved dragons and harsh, cold stone, Daenerys felt, for the first time in many years, that she was where she truly belonged. She ran her hand along a carved protrusion of a dragon's head in the wall, recalling old stories from her childhood that Viserys had told her by candlelight. Even in the echoes of her brother's cruelty, she could dredge up moments of closeness, those few times he had tried to guide her about their heritage before greed and desperation had fully consumed him. And now she stood at the seat of Targaryen power, armed with her own unwavering sense of justice, her dragons, and her armies prepared to reshape Westeros into a realm free from tyranny. She could not linger long on ceremony. There were matters of war to attend to, alliances to forge, foes to defeat. Her hand tightened around the pommel of a sheathed dagger at her waist. Far away, a mad queen sat the Iron Throne, Cersei Lannister, who had no rightful claim. Somewhere beyond the wall lurked the darkness that Jon Snow, king in the north, had spoken of with such urgency. Daenerys could feel the weight of the 7 kingdoms pressing down upon her shoulders. Yet all she could think was she still had all 3 dragons. No lives wasted in a desperate rescue mission beyond the frozen wilderness. Rhaegal had not been pierced by the scorpion bolts rumored to be in Qyburn's creation. Viserion had never been struck by the Night King's spear. Every life that belonged to her was still intact. The gods, if they existed, had seen fit to grant her a clear path and her full power. Drogon, largest of the 3, swept into the throne room through the towering entrance that led out onto a rocky ledge. His wings scraped the air with the force of a gale, scattering dust and dragging shadows over the black floor. Daenerys felt an almost unbearable surge of love and pride at the sight of him. Rhaegal and Viserion were behind him, smaller but no less fearsome. They perched on the ledge, gazing down at their mother. For a breathless moment, Daenerys remembered the days in the Great Grass Sea when they were tiny enough to perch on her shoulders. Now they were near the size of a house, magnificent and proud. She reached out a hand, allowing Drogon to press his massive snout into her palm. She whispered soft words in High Valyrian, praising him. Grey Worm appeared at the far entrance, his face implacable as always, but behind it Daenerys sensed a measure of triumph, a glimmer of satisfaction at all they had accomplished so far. He dipped his head in respect. "Your Grace," he said in his steady, unwavering voice. "Shall we begin sending out ravens to the lords of Westeros, announcing your arrival and demanding their fealty?" Daenerys turned from her dragons and gazed at him. The power in her eyes was tempered by compassion. "Yes, and we must also send word to Jon Snow. Let him know I will meet with him and hear his concerns about the White Walkers. We will plan how to unite Westeros against all threats." Missandei took down her words, translating into the common tongue with her usual precision for distribution by Raven. Daenerys's first act would be to open the lines of communication, neither a demand nor a threat outright, but a statement. The rightful queen of the Seven Kingdoms had come home, and she would not shy away from any challenge. For too long, Westeros had suffered under the Lannisters, who had little regard for the smallfolk. For too long, the land had been left vulnerable to the creeping shadows beyond the wall. It was time for a queen who could unite both the living and, if it came to that, the dead. But she would need the North. She would need the Stormlands, the Vale, all corners of this fractured land. Above all, she still had 3 dragons. The might of House Targaryen was more tangible than it had been in a century. As evening fell, Daenerys ventured out onto the ramparts overlooking the sea. The wind was keener here, carrying the scent of salt and the hush of distant waves smashing endlessly upon the rock. She closed her eyes to steady her mind. She remembered those early days in Essos when she was but a frightened girl sold into marriage and marveled at the transformation. Khal Drogo's words to her about conquering seemed like a lifetime ago. She could still picture the great Khal galloping across the grasslands, braids flying. He had wanted to take the Iron Throne for her. She wished he could see her now on the edge of conquest, but tempered by wisdom and compassion gleaned from her many trials. A warmth grew at her side. Rhaegal had landed quietly on the rampart, folding his green wings behind him. His neck craned as he set a curious eye on her. She reached out, felt the heat that rose from his scales, and murmured his name. He rumbled in response, pressing his snout gently to her side. Once she might have feared them, these children of fire, but no longer. They were her sons, her protectors, her greatest allies. With all 3 alive and thriving, she felt unstoppable, but also wary of letting that power blind her to compassion. She would not be her father, the Mad King, nor become twisted by ambition as others had. When word arrived from Winterfell that Jon Snow was willing to meet, Daenerys ordered her people to make preparations for the king in the north to travel south, or, if he willed it, she would fly to him. But the reply was quick. Jon Snow would come, with a small retinue, to Dragonstone. The Northern King had chosen to place some trust in the rumored breaker of chains, she who was called the Mother of Dragons. Daenerys felt her heart lighten. Alliances began with gestures like these. She sensed in Jon Snow a kindred spirit, one burdened by duty yet guided by an earnest desire to protect his people. This was exactly the sort of ally Daenerys needed if Westeros was to be saved from the many horrors that hovered on its horizon. She descended to the beach to greet him on the appointed day, accompanied by Tyrion and Missandei. The dwarf wore his usual wry half-smile, though Daenerys caught the tension in his eyes. Tyrion Lannister had once believed so firmly in the cunning and cruelty of his sister Cersei that he suspected every step in Westeros might be riddled with traps. Yet Jon Snow was Ned Stark's son, well, his supposed son. Tyrion had come to trust the Northerners' sense of honor, if nothing else, through rumors and shared experiences at the Wall. Missandei stood poised and immaculate at Daenerys' side, her posture regal in its own right. She had come a long way from the slave markets of Astapor, and she carried herself with quiet dignity. A northern galley appeared beyond the headland, bearing the Stark sigil on its sails. As it docked, a small party disembarked, Jon Snow among them, dressed in dark fur, eyes scanning the shore with a cautious curiosity. Beside him walked Ser Davos Seaworth, who watched with a mixture of wonder and concern. The wind tugged at their cloaks. They both glanced up when, with a thunderous rush of wind, Drogon swooped low overhead, roaring. Behind him followed Rhaegal and Viserion, a triumphant formation in the cloudy sky. Daenerys allowed herself a slight, measured smile. She knew the value of making a strong impression. Jon's eyes were wide when he approached. Daenerys felt the intensity of his gaze, that dark, brooding watchfulness that weighed everything around him. She spoke first, her voice carrying over the crashing waves. "Welcome to Dragonstone. I am Daenerys of the House Targaryen, rightful queen of the Undulls and the First Men, protector of the Seven Kingdoms, the Mother of Dragons, breaker of chains, and Khaleesi of the Great Grass Sea. Thank you for accepting my invitation." Jon dipped his head, his thick northern accent tinged with deference. "Thank you, your grace. I am Jon Snow, king in the north, though I come seeking neither conquest nor conflict. Only your aid and your understanding." From the start, they spoke of the threat beyond the wall, the White Walkers, the army of the dead. Daenerys listened carefully. She had never seen these creatures for herself, yet she sensed no deceit in Jon's bearing. His urgency, his quiet fear, mirrored the accounts shared by her trusted advisors who had traveled in the far north. She responded by recounting her own trials in Essos, of how she had liberated slaves and punished tyrants, how she valued the freedom of the people. Tyrion and Ser Davos contributed here and there, bridging the conversation with anecdotes that turned wariness into a subtle acceptance. By the time they ascended Dragonstone's steep steps toward the Great Hall, they had not formed an alliance yet, but the seeds of one had certainly been planted. Over supper, Daenerys observed Jon carefully. He was guarded, always measuring his words, but she saw beneath that stoic northern shell. He had a good heart, one that mourned the living he could not save and fought for the living who needed protection. She sensed his disbelief that she remained so resolute in her claim, yet he did not seem threatened by the notion of her monarchy so much as the possibility that their time might be wasted in a battle for the Iron Throne when an existential threat loomed. She told him frankly that the Iron Throne was her birthright and that she would not simply abandon her claim. However, she also assured him that if the threat of the White Walkers was as real as he said, she would fight it by his side. She had dragons, an army, and the will to see it done. No one in that hall knew how the presence of all three dragons would shift events so drastically in the days to come. Viserion still hissed and snorted at passing strangers, flames crackling on his breath, a living testament to Targaryen might. Rhaegal ruffled his wings and licked the salty air while Drogon perched like a living volcano ready to erupt at his mother's command. The unimaginable power to destroy entire armies was at Daenerys's command. Yet she tempered that potential destruction with empathy, with an earnest desire to free the kingdom from cruelty. At the supper's end, Jon Snow stood, nodded respectfully, and pledged he would do what he could to help her gain the North's trust if she would pledge her support against the Night King. The hush that followed was the first foundation stone of their alliance. Days spilled into weeks, and the fortress of Dragonstone buzzed with urgent preparations. The ravens brought news. Euron Greyjoy prowled the seas, hunting for Daenerys's allies. In the Riverlands, the remnants of House Frey were in disarray. In King's Landing, Cersei Lannister schemed, forging new alliances and extracting higher taxes to fund her war machines. It was whispered that Qyburn, her dark alchemist, had built massive scorpions to fell dragons from the sky. Daenerys's forces unsullied Dothraki, fleets of loyal ships from the Iron Islands under Yara Greyjoy organized. And the three dragons soared in daily hunts, occasionally scorching a few rocks far from the castle as a warning of what they could do to those who stood against their mother. Dany spent many hours in council with Jon Snow. She found herself drawn to his earnest manner, his sense of honor that recalled old tales of the noble Ned Stark. Though she recognized that any closeness between them had political ramifications, she still appreciated his integrity. He spoke often of the cost of war, how thousands could die in a battle for the throne, while the greater enemy, the White Walkers, grew stronger with every life lost in the north. Daenerys listened. She found her thoughts shifting away from the immediate conquest of King's Landing and focusing more on the existential threat. It dawned on her that perhaps ruling the Seven Kingdoms meant protecting every inch of it, even the bleak, frozen north beyond the wall. Once or twice, in moments of quiet, she considered how the entire conflict might have evolved had she lost any of her dragons before. Perhaps she would not have had the courage or the means to even listen to Jon's pleas. But now, with the full strength of her children, the prophecy of a song of ice and fire felt closer than ever, shimmering just at the edge of her understanding. Tyrion urged caution. Storming King's Landing outright could lead to a staggering loss of civilian life. Perhaps they should first strike at the Lannister armies in a way that undermined their ability to reinforce the capital. Cut off Casterly Rock or lure Jaime Lannister's forces into open battle where the dragons could break them. Daenerys was tempted. She wished to rid the realm of Cersei's cruelty. But she also recalled that her vow to Jon came with certain priorities. She must not squander her forces on a campaign that would weaken their position when the undead came. Winter was upon them, and with it the rumor that the White Walkers were advancing. Jon insisted they needed dragoglass, the obsidian that lined the caves beneath Dragonstone, and so Daenerys gave her blessing to mine it. She even walked through the dark caverns with Jon, letting him show her the shimmering black walls that might just save the entire kingdom. It was during these days that Daenerys decided to demonstrate her strength more than once, particularly when she received news that Euron Greyjoy had sacked a portion of the coastline near Dorne and captured allies loyal to House Martell. Seeking to send a clear message, she mounted Drogon, with Rhaegal and Viserion following. The Dothraki screamed in elation as they rowed across the waves in swift galleys, while the Unsullied manned the deck of a larger ship that sailed behind. Flying above them, Daenerys felt the old thrill of freedom, of unstoppable might. When she found Euron's fleet, dark-sailed and reeking of the Iron Islands, she let the dragons loose. Flames scorched decks, splintered masts, and turned proud warships into floating infernos. Though Euron managed to slip away in the chaos, many of his ships were reduced to ash. The dragons roared in their terrifying glory, unscathed by the clumsy bolts from enemy crossbows. As Daenerys soared overhead, she sensed the truth. So long as she had her dragons, she could meet any threat on equal or greater footing. The songs of old Valyria lived again in her children, and she would not surrender them to any foe. Upon her return to Dragonstone, she was greeted with both awe and caution by her advisors. Tyrion worried about the spectacle of such devastation, reminding her that fear alone might not be the best foundation for loyalty. Daenerys accepted his counsel. "It is not just fear, but proof," she said, "that I am a queen who will protect my allies and punish those who harm the innocent." The memory of the burning fleet hung in her mind like a painting of fire across the sea. She did not relish the slaughter, but she recognized its necessity. Euron would think twice before raiding the coasts again. Word of the defeat would spread, and with it, the notion that the Targaryen queen could strike anywhere at any moment. Meanwhile, letters arrived from the north. The army of the dead was on the march. Reports from wildlings said the Night King had giants in his ranks, wights that knew neither fear nor fatigue. Already, Eastwatch by the sea had begun to fortify, but the entire wall stretched thin. Jon Snow pressed Daenerys further, urging her to come north and see for herself the threat they faced. She consulted with her war council, torn between the necessity of confronting Cersei and the vow she'd made to stand by the living against the dead. In the end, she did not hesitate for long. She could still recall standing on the top of a distant pyramid in Meereen, gazing out over a city that had nearly fallen to chaos, and how she had returned with her dragons to restore peace. She knew now that the White Walkers would not stop for southern politics. This was a war for the survival of humanity. And so she decided to lead a contingent north, dragons in tow. She commanded Grey Worm to hold Dragonstone, ensuring that the fortress would remain secure against any Lannister strike. Tyrion would remain behind to coordinate with allies from the Reach and Dorne, forging supply lines. Missandei, ever loyal, insisted she accompany Daenerys, but Daenerys bade her remain. If something happened in the north, if Daenerys was ensnared in a trap, someone must keep the reins of power. Besides, Missandei had proven an excellent diplomat, forging ties with any who might be swayed to Daenerys's cause in the south. So it was that Daenerys, riding Drogon, with Rhaegal and Viserion flying at her side, soared over the narrow sea, accompanied by a small fleet of ships carrying Dothraki riders and carefully selected Unsullied. Jon Snow, having returned north already to prepare his people, would meet her at White Harbor, and from there they would travel to Winterfell. The day they landed at White Harbor, the north beheld the full might of House Targaryen for the first time in centuries. Townsfolk spilled out of their homes, peering up in wonder as 3 dragons cast shadows across the harbor. Some fled in terror, but others stood transfixed by the spectacle, uncertain whether to cheer or hide. Daenerys dismounted, patting Drogon's warm flank, soothing him with gentle words. She knew the north was wary of outsiders, and showing up with monsters of legend did little to calm that. Yet she wanted them to see that she came not as a conqueror but as an ally. There was no immediate flight of flames across the city, no destruction. Just a silent, inspiring arrival. Jon Snow arrived in the courtyard within hours. He looked upon her with something close to relief. "I'm grateful you came," he said, voice subdued. "We'll need every advantage we can get." Daenerys nodded. "I gave you my word. We will stand against the Night King together." They journeyed inland, into the snow-laced roads that wound toward Winterfell, the seat of House Stark. The banners of the dire wolf flapped from the walls, a reminder of the North's ancient lineage. Once inside, Daenerys was received by Sansa Stark, who retained a polite but chilly courtesy. The Lady of Winterfell had weathered many hardships and betrayals, and though she recognized the necessity of alliance, she did not immediately kneel. Daenerys expected as much. She admired Sansa's resolute composure and made it clear that she had no desire to trample northern pride. If they were to defeat the army of the dead, they would need solidarity. All that truly mattered was forging a united front. Days at Winterfell were frigid, the nights even more so. Yet Daenerys spent much of that time forging bonds with the northern lords, reassuring them that the Targaryen queen would not burn their fields or enslave their people. She was here to ensure they all lived. The dragons, ironically, proved useful. Their presence, fearsome and awe-inspiring, underscored the reality that Daenerys was not just another southern ruler. She was something else, something that might just tip the scales in the living's favor. Often, She found Regal perched on a parapet near the godswood, his luminescent eyes tracking the comings and goings of the northerners as they mustered. Viserion prowled the outskirts, hunting deer. Drogon took to roosting atop the battlements, leaving watchers trembling in their boots. Bran Stark, a strange, solemn boy with distant eyes, told them all that time was short. He seemed to know things no mortal should, spoke of visions and the Night King's unstoppable approach. Daenerys did not dismiss him. She had seen too many wonders and horrors in her life to doubt magic outright. She was also keenly aware that if any one of her dragons were to fall into the Night King's hands, the consequences would be dire beyond imagining. She vowed to keep them safe, to never let them fall to an enemy's spear or a necromancer's dark power. It was a vow she held fiercely, an unspoken reproof to fate itself, as though her defiance had prevented the tragedies that once might have befallen her children. When news came that the army of the dead had broken through the last hearth, a hush fell across Winterfell. The White Walkers were no more a distant rumor but a tangible threat marching steadily southward. Every able-bodied man, woman, and youth was put to the task, sharpening spears, forging weapons from dragonglass, reinforcing the walls. The entire courtyard rang with the sounds of hammers on steel. Dothraki rode out in scouting parties, their curved rocks glittering in the winter sun, seeming out of place in the snow-laden fields. The Unsullied formed up in disciplined ranks before the castle gates. Jon Snow led his own men, drilling them in the bow and spear. Daenerys walked among them, offering words of encouragement that were met with cautious nods. For some, she was still a foreign invader. But for many, the presence of dragons overhead stirred a seed of hope. Perhaps the living truly could unite and stand against the tide of death. Night fell earlier each day, a thick hush descending on the Snow's Cape as the army of the dead crept closer. Scouts reported unnatural cold, the strangled silence of forests bereft of birds, the sound of clattering bones on the wind. Daenerys did not show outward fear, though inside her heart pounded. She had faced slavers, warlocks, and treacherous kings, but never the undead. Still, she possessed a weapon of living flame. She had Drogon, Viserion, and Regal who could sweep across the enemy, turning countless whites into cinders. She prayed that would be enough. Finally, on a bitterly cold twilight, the horns on Winterfell's ramparts blew thrice, an echo from the old days of the Night's Watch. The undead had been spotted in the distance, a horde too vast to count. Daenerys mounted Drogon, hands steady on his scaled neck. Jon Snow, now astride Regal, a shocking development spurred by the dragon's strange acceptance of him, flew by her side. Viserion roamed overhead, riderless but fiercely loyal. The plan was simple: hold the line at the trenches outside Winterfell's walls. When the undead advanced, the dragons would sweep in, incinerating as many whites as possible while the archers loosed dragonglass arrows from the battlements. The Dothraki, with dragonglass blades affixed to their arcs, would charge when signaled while the Unsullied formed a phalanx behind them. Every inch of ground must be paid for in undead ashes. And then they came, silent, merciless, an endless mass of twisted figures with eyes like pale blue stars. Daenerys and her dragons soared overhead. The first torrent of dragon flame lit the darkness in a furious roar. Fire spread across the field, turning snow to steam, whites to cinders. For a moment, hope soared in Daenerys's breast. The tide of undead parted, screeching. But behind them came more, an unending legion. Drogon roared, banking to unleash another stream of flame. Across the battlefield, Jon urged Regal to do the same. A golden inferno illuminated the northern night, a dance of flame against a sea of ice. Below, the living fought with every ounce of courage. The Unsullied thrust their spears, the Dothraki slashed in fierce arcs. The northern lords and knights of the Vale joined together to hold the line, every blade tipped with obsidian. Sansa and Arya Stark oversaw the defenses within the walls, ensuring no white slipped through. Bran waited in the Godswood, guarded by Theon Greyjoy and a handful of chosen warriors, though Daenerys had little time to ponder that arrangement. The clamor of steel and the shrieks of the dead filled the air. The Night King came at last, striding through the darkness on an undead horse with eyes of frosted blue. An aura of cold swirled around him, and wherever he passed, the dead stirred more violently, as though compelled by his hateful will. From high above on Drogon's back, Daenerys observed the tall figure. If even half the stories were true, he was older than memory, a being of silent malice that aimed to bring an endless night upon the world. She urged Drogon lower, letting him belch flame over a mass of whites at the Night King's flank. Tens, hundreds turned to ash. But the Night King merely raised a pale hand, and a bitter wind seemed to coil around Drogon's flames, lessening their reach. Daenerys gasped as the fire parted around the Night King, leaving him unharmed. His gaze, ancient and cruel, lifted to meet hers, and for a moment their eyes locked. Daenerys felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. She did not waver. She signaled Jon, who was sweeping in on Rhaegal, to attack from another angle. Jon and Rhaegal plummeted from the clouds, unleashing a fiery torrent aimed directly at the Night King. This time, the unholy creature spurred his horse forward, weaving through the swirling flames, raising a wicked-looking spear of ice. Daenerys's heart clenched. She recalled the horror stories told of how a dragon could be felled. But no spear had yet flown. Drogon roared in defiance, sword overhead. The Night King's arm tensed as if to throw. Before he could loose the spear, Viserion descended from behind, jaws wide, exhaling a storm of fire that briefly engulfed the Night King's horse. The beast collapsed in a steaming heap of broken limbs. The Night King was forced to spring away, rolling across the snow. Though unharmed, the vantage he held was lost. Angered, he turned his icy glare on Viserion, raising the spear. Daenerys's heart leapt into her throat. But Viserion, agile and quick, beat his wings and wheeled away at the last heartbeat. The spear of ice sailed past him, shattering on the frozen ground, sending shards spinning. A second later, Drogon descended upon the Night King with roaring flames. The White Walker Lord raised his hand to block, but Jon and Rhaegal swept in from the side, intensifying the inferno. For the first time, Daenerys saw the Night King waver under the combined might of two dragons. He seemed to bend, to sink beneath the onslaught, though not destroyed outright. The dead around him shuddered, momentarily disoriented. It was enough of a reprieve for the living to surge forward, cutting them down. At the command of the living, trebuchets launched barrels of flaming pitch and obsidian shards. Archers rained dragonglass arrows. The entire battlefield was chaos. Flame, ash, ice, screams. Daenerys circled high, scanning the lines, ensuring no portion of the living's defense had collapsed. It was not an orderly battle by any means. In the darkness, it was difficult to see which pockets of whites still advanced. But she could feel the difference her dragons made. Had she lost even one of them earlier in the war, whether to the Night King's spear in some ill-fated mission beyond the wall or to the scorpions of Cersei's invention, this battle might have been hopeless. Instead, she felt the living stood a chance. Roaring and defiant, Drogon descended again, and Daenerys directed him to burn another wave of whites pressing in from the east. She spotted Ghost, Jon's direwolf, bounding through the chaos with feral grace, ripping at undead flesh. Davos led a line of archers, stoic but resolute. Ser Brienne of Tarth fought shoulder to shoulder with Jaime Lannister, an unlikely duo, each slashing down whites with dogged perseverance. The Hound cursed and hacked, while Arya Stark moved in swift, lethal arcs of her dragonglass staff. Daenerys watched them with a strange blend of admiration and sorrow. So many brave souls. She only hoped they would survive the night. In the midst of the fray, Jon and Rhaegal landed amidst a circle of whites, forging a brief safe zone in the swirl of the undead. Jon leaped off the dragon's back and sliced through the monstrous figures with long claw, each stroke cleaving ancient flesh that turned to dust and ice. Rhaegal unleashed a torrent of flame around him, sparing Jon from being overwhelmed. Daenerys circled above, wanting to help but confident Jon could hold his own. She directed Drogon to protect the vulnerable flanks, letting flames carve a protective barrier. Across the battlefield, the Night King re-emerged, fury emanating from his cold presence. Raising his arms, he summoned the dead anew. Corpses of fallen fighters, both friend and foe, began to twitch and rise. Daenerys shuddered. The living fought bravely, but with each death, the Night King's power only grew. Their advantage lay in the dragon's unwavering might. At her command, Drogon soared down and engulfed entire swathes of newly risen whites, giving them no chance to fully stand. She saw Rhaegal and Viserion do the same. Again, the Night King tried to hurl a spear of ice at one of her children, but the dragons, forewarned, stayed in constant motion. Their roars filled the night sky, drowning out the shrieks of the dead. Slowly, inexorably, the living began to push the undead ranks back. Every time the whites threatened to overwhelm one portion of the line, a pass by the dragons cleared them out in a blaze. Somewhere near the heart of the battlefield, the Night King engaged Jon Snow in single combat, sidestepping his furious strokes and trying to freeze him with some unearthly power. But Jon, tempered by hardship and heartbreak, persevered, deflecting the White Walker's sword with dragoglass and Valyrian steel. Longclaw shimmered with each clash. The Night King's eyes blazed with malice. He pressed Jon hard, and though Jon fought valiantly, Daenerys could see him weakening. She urged Drogon forward, ready to incinerate the Night King yet again, despite Jon's proximity. But before she could unleash the flame, an arrow of dragoglass struck the Night King from the side. Arya Stark had found her mark. The Night King snarled, turning to see the slim figure knocking another arrow. Jon seized the moment and drove Longclaw toward the White Walker's chest. With preternatural speed, the Night King caught the blade, frost creeping along the steel. But in that same moment, from behind, Bran's direwolf Summer, somehow recalled to stand by him in the Godwood, lunged. In the swirl of illusions and half-seen movements orchestrated by Bran's mysterious powers, the direwolf's fangs found the Night King's flank, distracting him. Jon wrenched Longclaw free and slashed with all his might. Tom seemed to freeze. The Night King reeled, ice fracturing across his torso, eyes blazing one last time. Then, with a shuddering crack, he splintered into shards of blue-white ice that dissolved into the wind. A keening wail went up from every white on the battlefield, a sound like the shattering of frozen glass. Their eyes dulled, and one by one, they fell to the earth, bones clattering, corpses collapsing, the dark magic that sustained them extinguished. Daenerys let out a sob of relief, hardly daring to believe. The army of the dead was undone. The living had prevailed. In the hush that followed, smoke wafted over the battlefield like morning mist. The stench of death was overwhelming. So many had fallen. The broken forms of the slain dotted the ground. Daenerys descended upon Drogon, landing near Jon Snow, who remained standing in the snow, breathing heavily, Longclaw's tip buried in the frozen ground. She slid off Drogon's side and ran to him, ignoring the exhaustion that weighed on every limb. He looked up, meeting her gaze. In that moment, neither needed words. The living had achieved the impossible, thanks to their unity and thanks to the unbroken line of Daenerys's dragons. If Viserion or Regal had been lost at any point, the entire balance of this night might have shifted in the Night King's favor, plunging Westeros into eternal darkness. The days that followed were a blur of mourning and muted celebration. The victory had come at a heavy price, but it was a victory. Every corner of Winterfell was turned into a makeshift infirmary, with the wounded lying on pallets of straw. Daenerys walked among them, offering comfort where she could, assisted by Maester Wolkan and the healers. She helped ensure that no one was overlooked. Northmen who had once glowered at her in distrust now nodded in gratitude. If not for her dragons, the undead would have overwhelmed them all. Jon Snow resumed his duties as king in the north, but with a new respect from the lords who had witnessed his deeds on the battlefield. By his side, Daenerys found a new acceptance. Sansa Stark approached her personally, eyes still carrying a hint of wariness, but also genuine thanks. "You saved us," Sansa said softly. "I won't forget that." Daenerys merely nodded, acknowledging the weight of responsibility she carried. She vowed she would not abandon them in their time of rebuilding. But the war for the Dawn was won, and it was time for Daenerys to turn her gaze south once more. The Iron Throne still lay in the clutches of Cersei Lannister. Westeros, though saved from the undead, remained fractured, bruised by years of conflict. If any realm was to be forged anew, one that protected all its people, broke the chains of oppression, and ended the cycles of violence, it would be under a queen who understood both fire and blood, yet chose mercy where possible. Daenerys meant to be that queen. The bonds of trust she had formed in the north would endure, so she hoped. Before departing, she stood in Winterfell's godswood, the heart tree's red leaves drifting around her. She thought of the old gods, of the new, of the Lord of Light, and the many faiths she had encountered. Was there truly any deity, or was fate shaped by mortals alone? She only knew that she had been spared certain tragedies. Fate had allowed her to keep each of her dragons whole and healthy. She would not waste this gift. She departed Winterfell with half her forces, leaving a portion of the Unsullied and Dothraki to help the North recover. She also asked a few local masons to come south eventually, when the snows melted, to help rebuild areas ravaged by war. Jon vowed that should she need him, the North would answer her call. A hush fell over the crowd as she mounted Drogon once more, Regal and Viserion flanking her. They soared away from the ancient seat of House Stark, across the white fields glinting with the first rays of a new dawn. The snows stretched out beneath them, silent and pure, as though the war had never happened. But Daenerys bore the memory in her heart. The flight south was long. She set course for Dragonstone, her stronghold, to regroup and plan the next stage of her campaign against Cersei. Tyrion, Missandei, and Grey Worm greeted her with relief. Their faces lit up when they saw that not one, but all 3 dragons accompanied her. The war in the north had been won, and now it was time to secure the peace of the realm. Tyrion reported that Cersei's hold on the Crownlands had grown tenuous. Many lords, having heard rumors of Daenerys' victory against the undead, were beginning to question their loyalty. Some had sent envoys quietly, asking about the terms of surrender or alliance. Others remained steadfast with the Lannister queen out of fear or pride, but Daenerys felt the tide turning. In her war council, she weighed her options. Tyrion suggested a demonstration of might, maybe a swift strike against the main Lannister forces in an open field. Grey Worm endorsed a direct siege of King's Landing, trusting the dragons to break its formidable walls. But Daenerys worried for the common people trapped inside. She remembered the sack of Astapor, the carnage in Yunkai, and she resolved not to unleash devastation upon a city full of innocents if it could be avoided. She wanted to be a queen loved by her subjects, not feared as a tyrant. That meant a more precise strategy. Scouts soon reported that Jaime Lannister, having survived the war to the north, had returned south. Some rumors said he was at Casterly Rock trying to gather what remained of the Lannister forces. Others claimed he was at King's Landing urging Cersei to parley. Daenerys sent word to her armies in the Reach, commanded by her loyal ally, the newly appointed Warden of the South, to prepare for a coordinated approach. The plan: encircle King's Landing but leave a route open for civilians to flee or surrender. Demand that Cersei step down. If she refused, Daenerys would demonstrate the might of her dragons just enough to force a swift conclusion without wholesale slaughter. As Daenerys and her forces moved across the Crownlands, the small folk watched from the roadside. Some cowered, but many recalled the stories of how this Targaryen queen had broken chains in Essos. They saw how she commanded both the might of the dragons and the discipline of the Unsullied, yet did not set them loose to pillage. Traveling behind her marched the Dothraki, unbowed and fierce, but leashed by her authority. Occasionally, a child or a farmer would step forward to offer a token of bread or fruit. Daenerys graciously accepted, ensuring payment or an exchange of some form. She wanted them to see a queen who believed in fairness, not plunder. Upon reaching the outskirts of King's Landing, Daenerys established her camp. Her war council assembled beneath a grand crimson canopy. From its ridge fluttered the banner of the 3-headed dragon of House Targaryen, newly embroidered in black and red. The city's walls loomed in the distance. From the camp, Daenerys could glimpse the Red Keep perched on Aegon's High Hill, a fortress that once belonged to her ancestors. It had witnessed the madness of her father, the schemes of traitors, the coronations of usurpers. She would take it back, and she would do so in a way that marked the dawn of a just reign. An emissary arrived from the Red Keep, Qyburn, gaunt and unsettling. He spoke in hushed tones, feigning courtesy, but Daenerys read the malice behind his eyes. He carried Cersei's offer of a truce, which in reality was a demand that Daenerys abandon her claim and sail back to Essos. In return, the Lannisters would graciously refrain from further confrontation. Daenerys' laughter was cold. She thanked Qyburn for his trouble and sent him away, reminding him that the war with the dead was over and she now had full might to call upon. The next day, Daenerys soared above the city walls on Drogon's back, while Regal and Viserion flanked her in a fearsome triangle. Hundreds of scorpions lined the battlements, Cersei's last gambit. Daenerys roared an ultimatum, her voice amplified by the dragon's thunderous cries. Surrender now and no harm would befall the innocents. Resist and suffer the consequences. For a moment, the city's defenders wavered, uncertain whether to fire on the dragons or tremble in fear. Then, with a clarion call of horns, the gates opened to disgorge the Lannister forces. A pitched battle seemed inevitable. Daenerys hovered above, scanning for any sign that the scorpions were about to loose their bolts. She ordered Regal and Viserion to split, making it impossible for the defenders to track all 3 at once. Grey Worm and the Unsullied advanced on foot, shields locked in a disciplined phalanx. The Dothraki thundered across the plain, their war cries echoing. For a tense moment, the entire field was a tableau of conflict waiting to explode. Then one scorpion fired, a bolt slicing the air. Daenerys urged Drogon to bank aside, the projectile whistling past them. Another bolt flew, aimed at Regal, who evaded it with a fierce flap of his wings. The defenders began to reload, but the dragons struck in unison, belching plumes of fire at strategic points, burning the scorpions themselves but avoiding large-scale destruction of the city walls. Daenerys had practiced this assault plan meticulously. She did not want to burn King's Landing to the ground. She wanted to break Cersei's defenses quickly. As the Lannister front lines collided with the Unsullied, the battle was short and decisive. The discipline and morale of Daenerys's forces outmatched the weary defenders who had been battered by years of continuous conflict. Many of the city's gates were thrown open by small folk who wanted no part in Cersei's last stand. Daenerys watched from Drogon's back as the red banners of House Lannister began to fall, replaced by the black and red standard of House Targaryen or the white and gray dire wolf of House Stark, flown by allied northern men who had marched south. The dragon soared overhead, unleashing carefully measured blasts of flame that targeted pockets of resistance. Cersei's scorpions, though formidable in theory, could not match the unstoppable combination of flight, dragon-scale resilience, and coordinated ground assaults. Within hours, the city was on the brink of surrender. Daenerys landed outside the Red Keep, her heart pounding. She felt the swirl of ash and dust around her as Drogon folded his wings. Grey Worm, Tyrion, and a host of guards approached. The gates to the Red Keep stood barred. She stood there, gazing up at the ancient fortress. She could have commanded Drogon to unleash his flame and melt the gates, but she paused, searching for a way to end this without more bloodshed. A hush fell across the courtyard. Soldiers from both sides looked on, hearts hammering. At last, the gates creaked open. Jaime Lannister appeared, flanked by a handful of Lannister guards. He held up a hand indicating he came in peace. Daenerys stepped forward, guarded but curious. Jaime's face was grim, but there was a glimmer of something like hope in his eyes. He explained that Cersei had locked herself in the throne room, refusing to surrender, planning to burn the city if she had to. He implored Daenerys to spare the innocent and let him talk Cersei down. Daenerys agreed, provided she join him at a safe distance with her dragon close at hand if needed. She would give Cersei one final chance to yield before unleashing the fire that could turn the Red Keep to rubble. They moved through the cavernous halls of the fortress that Aegon the Conqueror had built centuries ago. The weight of history pressed in on Daenerys. Dark corners whispered of family triumphs and tragedies. At last they reached the towering doors of the throne room. Within, upon the Iron Throne, sat Cersei Lannister, eyes alight with defiance. The hall was nearly empty, stripped of courtiers. Daenerys stood tall, Drogon's distant roars echoing outside, reminding all present of her power. Jaime stepped forward, voice tense as he begged his sister to surrender. He spoke of the unstoppable tide that had crashed against the city walls, of the promise Daenerys made not to slaughter innocents. For a heartbeat, it seemed Cersei might relent. Her mouth opened, lips trembling. But then her expression hardened and she reached for a hidden dagger, rising from the throne. Jaime stepped between her and Daenerys, heartbreak etched across his features. "Don't," he pleaded. "Don't make me do this." He had thrown down his sword in front of her once before, choosing a path away from madness. Cersei ignored him, her face twisted by rage. She lunged, dagger raised, screaming that she would never yield to a Targaryen. Jaime intercepted her arm with his golden hand. The dagger clattered on the stone floor. She staggered back, eyes wild, as guards hovered uncertainly by the walls. Daenerys's gaze never left Cersei. She saw, at this final moment, the reflection of another mad ruler, consumed by hatred and fear. There was no victory in this confrontation, only a tragic inevitability. Jaime gently placed a hand on Cersei's shoulder. She struggled free, screaming insults, cursing Daenerys, cursing the Starks, cursing the entire realm. Jaime's eyes were wet as he turned toward Daenerys, wordlessly conveying that the time for talk had ended. With solemn grace, Daenerys motioned for her guards to seize Cersei. They wrestled the former queen to her knees, disarming her. She spat venom, threatening all manner of retribution. Yet no wildfire raged, no final inferno consumed them. The city did not burn. Daenerys had not torched the innocents. The Red Keep still stood. In the hush that followed, footsteps echoed across the throne room floor. Daenerys walked to the Iron Throne, its twisted sword so familiar from her childhood dreams. She laid a hand upon the cold steel, letting the full weight of the moment wash over her. This was not the end of her journey, merely the beginning of a reign she hoped would free Westeros from cycles of cruelty. She turned to face the hall. There knelt Cersei, stripped of power, guarded by Unsullied. Jaime stood off to the side, torn by conflicting loyalties, but also resigned to what must be done. Outside, the city breathed in the aftermath of the battle. Scorched earth and battered walls told of the fight, but King's Landing had not descended into mindless slaughter. Daenerys' dragon soared overhead, living proof that a Targaryen queen sat the Iron Throne once more, yet one who had chosen restraint. Common folk peered from windows and doorways, uncertain but hopeful. Soldiers doffed their helms, kneeling in exhaustion and acceptance. Word spread, the Dragon Queen had captured Cersei Lannister and taken the throne with minimal bloodshed. All around, the small folk whispered that perhaps this was a new dawn, a sign that the old cycle might be broken. In the weeks that followed, Daenerys set about the monumental task of ruling. She named Tyrion as her hand, trusting in his cunning and sense of justice. She placed Grey Worm as the commander of her forces, ensuring stability in the city and punishing any who sought to loot or harm the innocent. She pardoned many who had been coerced into supporting Cersei under threat, so long as they swore fealty. Yet she also promised to hold accountable those who had committed atrocities of their own accord. The city's resources were marshaled to repair damage from the battle. Food stores were replenished from the Reach's bountiful fields. The poor were fed, disease was combated, and a new sense of cautious optimism took root. Cersei was imprisoned in the depths of the Red Keep, stripped of regal finery, left to face trial for her many crimes, including the explosion at the September of Baelor, the treachery against House Tyrell, and the subjugation of King's Landing under terror. Jaime, torn between guilt and relief, chose to aid in the city's recovery, though the gulf between him and his sister was now unbridgeable. He spent many hours in the training yard, guiding young recruits and occasionally conversing with Brienne of Tarth, who had come south to help maintain the peace. Jon Snow traveled south again, partly to ensure the alliances he had forged remained strong, partly because he felt a tug in his heart he could not fully name. He witnessed the new order of King's Landing, a Targaryen queen enthroned, but not tyrannical. He saw the people adapting to a presence of dragons in the sky, watched as children gaped in awe at their flights. He recognized the difference it made that Daenerys had all three dragons. Fear remained, but overshadowed by a sense of security. It felt as though at last, the realm had a guardian who did not govern through terror alone. At the coronation ceremony, less an extravagant display and more a solemn blessing by representatives of the faith, Daenerys wore a gown of Targaryen black, lined with red accents shaped like dragon wings. Drogon, Regal, and Viserion hovered above the Red Keep, the setting sun catching the edges of their scales. She was crowned with a slender band of Valyrian steel, wrought into the shape of three dragons twisting together. Tyrion stood beside her, face alight with complicated pride. Grey Worm, expression grave, held the banner of her house. The hall was filled with lords who had come from across Westeros, some grudgingly, some eagerly, to witness the moment. The hush that fell was one of awe even among those who had once been her enemies. Daenerys Targaryen, first of her name, was acknowledged as the Queen of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. The applause was thunderous, yet she felt a calm that resonated from deep within. She had won not through unchecked destruction, but through unity, mercy, and might when necessary. In that moment, she reflected on the tenuous nature of power. How easily a single spear, a single betrayal, could have robbed her of a dragon, could have undermined everything. If she had lost Regal or Viserion, the Night King might have unleashed an undead dragon upon the living. If Euron's bolts or Qyburn's scorpions had felled any of them, Cersei might have had the upper hand and countless innocents would have died in a desperate final siege. But none of that had come to pass. Fate, or perhaps her own determination, had seen her maintain her strength intact. The realm now had a chance to heal. It would not be easy. Centuries of mistrust and divisions could not be undone overnight. But Daenerys believed in the future she envisioned, a land where the wheel of noble houses crushing the poor would finally be broken. As the crowd's roar subsided, Daenerys rose from the throne. She spoke clearly, addressing the hall and, symbolically, all of Westeros. I stand before you not as a conqueror who would set this city aflame, but as a queen who fought for the living when the darkness came. I vow to protect the realm, all of it from the north to the Dornish deserts. I vow to uphold justice, to free those who are oppressed. I do not wish to rule through fear, but through respect and fairness. My dragons shall serve as guardians, not tyrants. Her voice carried the steel of conviction. She knew her vow would be tested time and time again. But she would not falter. Jon Snow caught her eye, and a subtle warmth passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of shared struggles. Sansa and Arya Stark watched from a distance, each with her own emotions. Tyrion stood solemnly, Missandei near him, tears glistening in her eyes. Grey Worm, ever stalwart, gave a slight nod. Brienne and Jaime exchanged looks of cautious optimism. And high above, 3 dragons circled, free and alive, a living testament to a queen who had never lost them, who had kept them, and in doing so, preserved the hope for a better realm. The weeks and months that followed were a challenge of governance as much as a test of will. Daenerys established councils in each region, encouraging local lords and advisors to work with her. She insisted on reforms, fair taxation, the abolition of cruel practices, better roads and trade routes to ensure food could flow from one region to another. Tyrion navigated the complexities of southern politics, aided by Varys, who re-emerged with his little birds whispering secrets that helped stave off plots. Some lords grumbled about central authority from King's Landing, but Daenerys made clear that she intended a lighter hand than previous rulers. She also arranged to send relief to the war-torn north, shipping grain and supplies to help them recover from the devastation wrought by the army of the dead. Jon, though reluctant to linger in the south, made frequent visits to coordinate. Bonds of friendship and perhaps something deeper took root between him and Daenerys, bridging the gap between their houses. Cersei's trial was a public affair. The charges were long and grim. She sat in shackles, bitterness etched into her features. Many bore witness, the High Lords, the Faith, the people who had suffered under her. Evidence was laid out for her role in the destruction of the September, the murder of countless innocents, the repeated betrayals of the realm. Cersei never once pleaded for mercy. She spat her defiance, condemning all around her. In the end, the judges, selected from among the Faith and neutral lords, condemned her to life imprisonment in the darkest cells beneath the Red Keep. Daenerys, wearing the crown but not seated on the Iron Throne for the proceeding, chose not to sentence her to death. For some, that was an act of weakness. But Daenerys believed a public execution might turn Cersei into a martyr for those who opposed Targaryen rule. By choosing imprisonment, she signaled that justice could be tempered by restraint. Many among the small folk began calling Daenerys the Dragon of Mercy in contrast to her father's epithet as the Mad King. She welcomed the name in her heart, knowing she must always strive to live up to it. Others remained suspicious, fearful that at any moment the dragons might unleash their fury. But days passed peacefully, the city began to rebuild, and no firestorms razed entire districts. Common folk marveled at the silhouettes of Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion gliding across the sky. Children told tales of how the Queen's dragons had saved them from the dead. Songs were composed, sometimes whimsical, sometimes reverent, about the day of the great battle in the north. And slowly, Daenerys' vision of a new era started to crystallize. In the Red Keep's courtyard, far from the public eye, Daenerys would sometimes stand with her dragons. She fed them herself, taking comfort in their presence. They were not tame, they would never be truly tame, but they adored her as their mother, recognized her as the source of their freedom and care. She would stroke their scaled necks, recall the day they hatched from petrified eggs on a burning pyre, recall the unrelenting love she had for them, and feel a surge of gratitude that they had been spared so many potential tragedies. They were the last of their kind, and through them, the Targaryen legacy of old Valyria lived on. Yet she hoped that legacy would become something more than a cycle of conquest and vengeance. She wanted it to be a legacy of benevolent rule, of justice, of deliverance from tyranny. Late one evening, Daenerys sat at the edge of the Iron Throne's dais, barefoot, letting the chill of the stone floor ground her. Torchlight flickered across the swords that formed the throne, casting long shadows. The hall was empty, save for the ghosts of memory. Sometimes, when she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of those she had freed, those she had lost, Jorah Mormont, Khal Drogo, her unborn child Rhaegal, even Viserys, twisted and broken though he was. She remembered the many roads that had led her here, desert plains, city walls, the great grass sea, the frozen battlefields of the north. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of it all. Then, from the darkness, she sensed a presence. She opened her eyes and found Jon Snow standing there, quiet as a ghost. He walked forward, eyes flicking over the throne. "You should be resting," he said gently, a hint of concern in his voice. Daenerys smiled, a wry, weary smile. "So should you, King in the North. Or do I name you Warden of the North? I lose track of titles these days." Jon lowered his gaze, a flush coloring his cheeks. "I'll always be a Stark in heart." Though he paused as if uncertain whether to continue. Daenerys patted a spot beside her on the dais. He sat, placing Longclaw aside. For a while, they sat in companionable silence, neither needing words. They had borne so much resurrections of purpose, if not of body. She thought of how close they had come to losing everything beyond the wall. In some timeline, in some echo of fate, she might have rushed north to save Jon in a desperate mission, only to lose Viserion to the Night King. She might have faced the horror of an undead dragon tearing down the wall. She might have faced Euron's bolts with fewer dragons at her command. The realm might have burned, or frozen, or both. Instead, she was here, on the cusp of a new chapter. "Thank you," Jon said at last, his voice low. "For coming north when you did. For believing me." Daenerys reached out and curled her fingers around his. "And thank you for opening my eyes. Without you, I might have waged war on King's Landing first while the dead swept over the north. All of this, our victory, our future, is because we chose to stand together." Jon exhaled, shoulders relaxing. He gazed around the throne room as though seeing it for the first time. "It'll be different now, won't it? No matter who sits that throne, it's not the same realm we were born into." Daenerys nodded. "It must be different. We have dragons, yes, but we also have unity, at least more than the realms seen in ages. The North has bled for the South, and the South has come to the North's aid. We have proven that old hatreds can be set aside for survival and, I hope, for prosperity." He studied her face. "You're certain you want this? The throne, the weight of ruling over all these people? It never ends, does it?" She thought of her earliest dreams, the ones Viserys hammered into her mind. She recalled how that throne once felt like an unreachable destiny, a legacy that was hers by blood. Now that she had it, it felt more like a calling, a duty, than a prize. She turned to Jon. "I don't want it for the sake of power. I want it so no child grows up in fear. So no one is bought or sold in chains. So no more White Walkers ever descend upon our homes unchecked. I want to leave the realm better than I found it." Jon's grip on her hand tightened, silently conveying support. She felt the warmth of his skin, a reminder that neither of them was alone in this struggle. Outside, the faint call of a dragon pierced the night sky, one of her children, circling overhead. She allowed herself a small smile, a hopeful one. Wordlessly, they rose and walked out into the night together. The city stretched below, torches marking the streets and the outlines of the rebuilt gates. Far in the distance, the moonlight shimmered on Blackwater Bay. Her warships rode at anchor, black sails emblazoned with the three-headed dragon. The wind was cool but gentle. She felt the presence of Drogon, Regal, and Viserion above, guardians of this new era. Tomorrow, there would be more tasks, negotiations, laws to sign, disputes to settle. But for now, in the hush of the night, she allowed herself to breathe, to remember each step that had led her here. The realm was far from perfect, and challenges lay ahead. But the worst doom, the extinction of humanity under the Night King's heel, had been averted. The dread of seeing one of her dragons twisted into an instrument of death had never come to pass. The devastation that might have befallen King's Landing in a fury of dragon flame had been avoided. With all her children by her side, Drogon's fierce might, Regal's loyal heart, Viserion's cunning agility, Daenerys had forged a different destiny for Westeros. As dawn broke over the spires of the Red Keep, Daenerys stood upon the balcony watching the first rays of the sun catch the wings of her dragons. They soared gracefully, neither bound by fear nor crippled by tragedy. She closed her eyes and felt the warmth of the new day on her face. This was her reign. She would be remembered as Daenerys Stormborn, the queen who ended the long night, who united a broken realm, who chose mercy when she could have chosen terror. And all of it was made possible because she had never lost what truly made her the mother of dragons. The future was unwritten, but it was hers to shape in flame and hope, freed at last from the shackles of a history soaked in blood. Her children roared, welcoming the sunrise, and Daenerys smiled. In that harmony of dragon cries echoing across the awakening city, she heard not the end of her story but its bold, triumphant beginning. In the pale morning light that followed her late-night vigil in the throne room, Daenerys Targaryen felt an unfamiliar blend of exhaustion and resolve. The windows of Maegor's Holdfast glimmered with early sunshine as she made her way through the Red Keep's corridors, its dark passages once haunted by countless intrigues and ghosts of Targaryen lore. The fortress no longer felt forbidding, not as it had when she first arrived, riding at the head of armies and flanked by 3 living dragons. Instead, it felt strangely tranquil, as though the stones themselves had exhaled in relief after the tumult of recent years. Even so, the burden she carried seemed heavier with every step. She was queen now, recognized by lords and small folk alike, a symbol of rebirth. But such a symbol could easily falter if her next steps were misjudged. Her claim to the throne might have been won, but sustaining that claim would be a far greater test. Outside, the Red Keep's outer ward was already alive with purposeful activity. The Unsullied stood guard at each gate, their spears held in disciplined formation. Dothraki horses stomped the ground in restless circles, their riders dozing or chatting in small knots, the echo of their language resonant in the courtyard. Many of them had never seen a city like King's Landing before, let alone a city that had so recently been their target. Yet, under Daenerys' reign, the Dothraki had transitioned from conquerors to uneasy allies of this foreign realm. They roamed the streets without the wanton pillaging that others had feared, though discipline was occasionally tested. The presence of Grey Worm and the Unsullied, all unwavering loyalty and discipline, helped keep the peace. More than once, she had relied on Grey Worm's measured leadership to quell tensions, and she counted it a blessing that he had survived the war for the Dawn. He had lost many of his closest companions in battles from Essos to Winterfell, but his devotion to her cause, to the dream of a better world, had not diminished. This morning, Daenerys intended to meet Tyrion, Missandei, and Varys in a new council chamber she had ordered prepared near the base of the Tower of the Hand. The old tower had been partially damaged by dragonfire during the assault on the city, but workers labored daily to restore it. She had no wish to hold court in the same setting as her father, who had turned the Red Keep's halls into shadows of menace long before Robert's rebellion. So she'd asked that a more modest space, once used as an auxiliary hall for receptions, be repurposed for her small council. The morning air was soft with the promise of a fair day. Overhead, she glimpsed the silhouettes of her dragons drifting on mild thermals, scanning the city below in curious arcs. Now and again, Viserion let out a shrill cry, answered by Rhaegal, while Drogon, bigger than either of his siblings, flew in silent, watchful circles like a dark crescent across the sky. She arrived at the double doors of the newly anointed council chamber, taking a moment to compose herself. She wore a simple gown of pale gray, an unusual choice for a Targaryen queen, but she had wanted a color that spoke to calm and unity, rather than the fiery brilliance of her house sigil. Her hair was braided back, the silver gold of her locks neatly arranged, and she'd foregone a lavish crown. The circlet of Valyrian steel she'd been crowned with still waited in her chambers, displayed atop a small velvet cushion. Perhaps she would wear it for grand state occasions, but not for a routine meeting. She remembered the wisdom of the Essosi proverb she once heard in Meereen. A queen is not defined by the metal that weighs upon her brow, but by the burdens she carries for her people. Inside the chamber, Tyrion was pacing back and forth by a map table, running a hand through his blonde hair. Missandei stood near the table as well, her posture poised, her eyes scanning a heap of letters stacked by her elbow. Varys was half lost in the shadows of a corner, arms folded, expression pensive. He turned at the soft scuff of Daenerys' footsteps and offered a small bow. Tyrion halted, a faint grin crossing his face, one that did not quite hide a deep-seated worry. This was the face he wore when confronted by a puzzle that might threaten the realm he'd worked so hard to help Daenerys secure. "Your Grace," Tyrion said in greeting, inclining his head. "You're early. Though perhaps not early enough, there's always more news than time." Daenerys took her seat at the head of the table, gesturing for the others to sit as well. She liked the shape of this new council table. Unlike the elongated table of the small council chamber from years past, this one was round, ensuring no single vantage overshadowed the rest. A symbolic choice, but she believed symbols mattered. "Good morning," she said, looking from Tyrion to Varys and Missandei in turn. "Let's begin. Tyrion, you look as if you have a whole cask of sour wine to unload." The dwarf sighed and spread a sheaf of parchment. "We have word from the Iron Bank." He let that statement hang in the air as though it reeked of something unpleasant. Cersei's debts were quite extensive, and with her ousted from the throne, the Iron Bank naturally wants assurances from us. Daenerys listened without speaking at first. The Iron Bank had lurked in the background of Westerosi politics for generations, an institution that cared little for who ruled so long as debts were paid. She did not relish the idea of inheriting Cersei's obligations, but ignoring the Iron Bank risked sabotage, even covert attempts to unseat her for a more pliable debtor. "They want us to agree to repay the crown's debts?" she asked. Tyrion nodded. "With interest and rather substantial penalties for default. They're also hinting that if we refuse to meet these obligations, they'll back a claimant of their choosing, though I'm not sure who that might be now. Any other pretenders to the throne are either dead, in hiding, or plainly lacking support." Varys shifted, inclining his head. "However, the Iron Bank could fund disruption, sabotage. They have ways of exacting vengeance. And we must remember that they care nothing for the moral dimension of politics. Gold is their only loyalty." Daenerys pursed her lips. "Another burden." On one hand, the realm was exhausted from war and she had no desire to empty the treasury on foreign lenders while small folk went hungry. On the other, refusing the bank outright might lead to more conflict or even an embargo on goods from Essos that Westeros desperately needed. Grain, steel, or raw materials. We'll repay what we can, but not at the cost of letting the people starve, she said. We'll negotiate. Tyrion, I'll rely on your cunning. Put together an offer that includes partial payments over time. We can promise them favorable trade agreements once the realm recovers from war. Perhaps that will placate them. Tyrion exhaled slowly. I'll do my best. We'll need help from the major houses to rebuild the treasury, as well as an understanding that we can't simply wring more taxes out of peasants already at the brink of famine. A precarious dance indeed. See to it, Daenerys replied gently. She was determined not to crush the realm with crippling debts, the way so many kings in history had done before her. What else? Missandei tapped a letter. We've received multiple ravens from Dorne. They request formal recognition of their governance. With House Martell in disarray, Prince Doran and Prince Trystane gone, some of the nobles in Sunspear are vying for leadership. They ask if you'll appoint a new prince or princess, or if Dorne will be granted a measure of autonomy under the crown. Daenerys recalled her brief alliance with Ellaria Sand and the Sand Snakes, who had turned to her in search of vengeance against the Lannisters. Most of them were dead now, casualties of Euron Greyjoy's ambush or the subsequent unraveling of alliances in Dorne. She felt a pang of regret. Dorne has always prided itself on being semi-autonomous, she mused. They retained their titles of prince and princess even after joining the Seven Kingdoms. I do not wish to antagonize them by imposing a ruler from outside. We need stability and trust. Let them choose a candidate from among their own noble lines, provided that person swears fealty to the crown and agrees to abide by our laws. Varys nodded. The lords of Dorne have always been proud. But if you respect their traditions and allow them some measure of self-governance, they'll likely bend the knee without too much complaint. If they believe you're the best hope for a lasting peace, their loyalty might run deeper than any forced arrangement. Then let it be so, Daenerys agreed. Missandei draft a reply. Invite representatives from the great Dornish houses, Dane, Ironwood, Illyrian, Fowler, and others, to send an emissary. We'll host them here in King's Landing so we can finalize an accord. I want them to see for themselves that this city is not the same place it was under Cersei. They should meet me face to face. Missandei made a careful note. At once, Your Grace. Tyrion shifted the conversation next to the Stormlands. Gendry Baratheon, acknowledged by royal decree however informally as Robert Baratheon's bastard, had aided Jon Snow during the war against the dead. Rumor was that many Stormlords, weary of Lannister rule, looked to Gendry as a possible rallying point for House Baratheon's revival. He's no threat, Tyrion said, but that region needs a firm hand, and with you as queen, we must decide how to handle Storm's End. There's talk that Gendry's supporters want to legitimize him fully as a Baratheon. Daenerys had seen Gendry only a handful of times. He was quiet, forthright, with a strong arm for the forge. She admired that he had not sought power for power's sake. If it will help unify the Stormlands, she said after a moment, then let him have the name Baratheon. Let him take lordship of Storm's End if the local lords agree. He fought bravely in the wars against the Night King. He's proven his loyalty. So long as he swears fealty, he may restore his house. Tyrion's grin was genuine this time. As you wish, Your Grace. That will ease tensions in the Stormlands considerably. After another hour of updates, reports of unrest in the Westerlands, the forging of new trade pacts with Bravos, the slow recovery of the Crown's roads and farmlands, the council drew to a close. Daenerys reminded them all that she wished to address the city's grain stores personally, ensuring enough supply was secured before winter's chill crept further south. Though the long night had ended, the season was still harsh and the farmland had endured raids and battles. What good was a new queen if the people starved? When she emerged into the courtyard, she heard a roar overhead. With a rush of wind, Drogon descended, stirring dust and pebbles in the yard. Guards and courtiers alike scrambled aside to avoid being buffeted by the gusts of his powerful wings. Daenerys smiled as she shielded her eyes. It reminded her of those early days in Essos when Drogon was small enough to sit on her shoulder. He landed now with grace for his size, folding his wings with a leonine snarl. Regal and Viserion, circling above, soon found perches on the outer ramparts. Their watchful presence cast flickering shadows across the square. She brushed dust from her gown, stepping forward to caress Drogon's scaled neck. "Easy, my sweet," she murmured. "You've scared half the yard, witless." Drogon rumbled, lowering his head so she could stroke the ridges above his eye. There was an intelligence there, a bond forged in fire and mutual devotion. Each day that passed, Daenerys felt more certain that had she lost even one of her dragons on the field of war, whether to Qyburn's scorpions or the Night King's spear, so much of her triumph might have unraveled. The memory of that possibility haunted her. She would not allow it to slip from her mind lest she grow complacent. Nearby, Grey Worm emerged from a corridor, walking with practiced steadiness. He saluted, hand across his chest. "Your Grace, a detachment of city guards has returned. They report a disturbance near Flea Bottom, some looting and a small riot over bread." Daenerys sighed, her moment of closeness with Drogon eclipsed by the weight of governance. "Have we not already begun distributing rations from the crown stores?" "We have, but apparently there are rumors that the grain is spoiled or insufficient. Some unscrupulous shopkeepers have been hiking prices." Daenerys recalled the squalid conditions of Flea Bottom, how the city's purse were crammed into those twisting alleyways. "I'll go," she said. "As soon as possible. If the people fear they'll starve, I must see it for myself and put an end to the rumor. We can't have profiteers making the situation worse." Grey Worm hesitated, but he nodded. "As you command." He beckoned two unsullied captains to his side and passed along instructions in Low Valyrian. Within moments, a small armed escort was assembled to accompany the Queen into the heart of King's Landing. Daenerys felt a flicker of impatience at the necessity of an escort, yet she understood the risk. Not everyone in the city was satisfied with her rule. Some resented the presence of foreign soldiers, others still harbored loyalty to the Lannisters or simply hated all rulers equally. Safety demanded caution. Even so, she decided to leave Drogon behind. Sending a dragon roaring through Flea Bottom would only terrify the small folk further. She whispered a command to him to stay perched on the ramparts, and he settled on a high vantage to watch her depart. She traveled on foot through the bustling streets, accompanied by Grey Worm and a handful of Unsullied, along with a few city watchmen sworn to her service. The mood in the city had gradually improved since her coronation, but signs of hardship abounded. Walls pockmarked by past battles, neighborhoods still recovering from the chaos of Cersei's final days. Refugees from the war with the undead huddled in makeshift camps. As Daenerys passed, some onlookers bowed their heads or murmured respectful greetings. Others simply stared, uncertain what to make of a queen who wore a modest gown rather than gold-stitched finery, who traveled among them instead of staying aloof in her castle. When she reached Flea Bottom, the difference was stark. The buildings were overcrowded, leaning precariously over narrow alleys, their upper floors seeming to touch. The stench of unwashed bodies and rotting refuse hung in the stagnant air. Children in threadbare clothing ran barefoot while haggard mothers clutched watery bowls of stew. A pair of taverns were open, their doors flung wide, revealing sweaty patrons hunched over cheap ale. A group of shopkeepers stood outside a storehouse, loudly arguing about grain prices, jabbing their fingers at one another's chests. Grey Worm and his men fanned out, ensuring Daenerys would not be mobbed. She approached the storehouse where a man with a greasy apron was shouting at three other men who looked half-starved. The men froze when they saw the Unsullied, but the shopkeeper gaped openly at Daenerys, not quite believing that the silver-haired queen herself was in the middle of Flea Bottom. "What, your grace," he stuttered. "I didn't expect. Forgive me." He bowed clumsily, sweat beading on his brow. Daenerys lifted a hand, bidding him to rise. "You seem agitated," she observed. "Tell me why." The man glanced at the trio of ragged commoners who flinched under his gaze. "They want more bread than they can pay for," he said, flinging an arm toward them. "My prices aren't so high, I swear. But the cost to bring flour from the countryside is more than it was. Roads are unsafe and One of the ragged men cut him off, voice trembling with anger. "He's lying. A half-loaf costs a copper here when it used to be a quarter of that. We've got children to feed. We can't make enough coin in a week to buy enough bread for a day." Daenerys studied them carefully. She saw the hollowness in their cheeks, the desperation that only hunger can carve into a person's face. She recalled the plight of slaves in Essos who once starved under the rule of wealthy masters. Although these were freeborn Westerosi, the dynamic was tragically similar, a few profiting off scarcity while the many suffered. She turned her attention back to the shopkeeper. "Are you buying your grain at a higher rate?" she asked, voice measured. The man squirmed. Yes, well, prices have gone up. Or does that? Soldiers seizing supplies, the roads dangerous with deserters. Daenerys remembered the statements from her small council. The crown's storehouses were not yet full, but there was grain enough to distribute. She took a step closer, letting her presence loom just enough. We have begun distributing crown-funded grain to the city. Are you receiving it, or are you operating entirely on your own supply? He swallowed. I assume from the crown's supply, yes, but it's not enough to keep the shop open. I still have to buy from local farmers who charge more every day. And yet you're selling at prices that these men cannot pay. What good is your business if people starve outside your doors? Will you spend your coin once the city is in riots again, or will you use it to bury the bodies of your neighbors? The shopkeeper looked stricken. He glanced at the Unsullied, then at the men in rags. Your GRA. See, I have a family too. I can't just give it away for free. Daenerys understood. Charity alone wouldn't fix the realm's deeper problems. This was not so different from her efforts in Meereen to balance the local economy after freeing the slaves. She turned to Grey Worm. Send word to have additional wagons of grain delivered here from the crown's reserves. We'll ensure a fair price for bread, enough for you to make a living, she told the shopkeeper, but not so high that these men and their families go hungry. She then looked to the three men. Tell others that a new shipment is coming. You'll be able to purchase bread at a reasonable cost. But if any of you try to seize it by violence, no one gains. Let us do this in an orderly fashion. She addressed the shopkeeper once more. And you, if you attempt to profiteer from crown resources, you'll answer for it. Understood. The man bowed repeatedly, stammering agreement. The men in rags, though still wary, offered small, grateful bows of their own. Daenerys felt the tension lessen, replaced by a faint ripple of hope that spread through the onlookers crowding the alley. She heard murmurs among them, some repeating her name with a mixture of relief and amazement. A queen who walked among the poor, who brokered solutions rather than ordering them burned. It was a moment of small significance, yet she hoped it would sow seeds of trust where there had been only fear. While Grey Worm coordinated with the city watch to secure a space for the grain distribution, Daenerys moved deeper into Flea Bottom. People parted for her, gazing at her silver-gold hair, at her foreign guard, at the gentle aura of authority she projected. She paused by a well where a woman tried to draw water with shaking hands. The woman's face lit up in astonishment when she realized who had come near. Daenerys offered a few words of reassurance, even helped the woman hoist the bucket free. A child peeked out from behind a broken barrel, wide-eyed. Daenerys knelt and extended a hand. When the child approached, curiosity overcame fear, and she could almost see a flicker of wonder in those young eyes. She asked the child's name, learned it was Alta. The girl, perhaps 6 or 7, wore a ragged shift and was barefoot. Her mother had died in the last year, the father unknown. She survived by begging for scraps. Daenerys' heart clenched at the thought that in the city of thousands, Alta was but one of many orphans. She signaled Grey Worm to fetch something from a small coin purse carried by one of the Unsullied. When he returned, she pressed 3 silver stags into Alta's hand, telling her that it was enough to buy good bread for weeks. The child stared at the silver as though it were magic. Your Grace, Grey Worm said softly by her ear, you cannot feed all of them alone. Many are hungry. Daenerys straightened, nodding with resignation. I know. But we can start with this one. We must do better for them, Grey Worm. If the realm we fought to save is only for lords and castles, then we've learned nothing. She spent most of the morning in Flea Bottom, listening to petitions, guiding her guard to defuse tensions, and even ordering 2 watchmen who had extorted coin from local vendors to be taken into custody. She left the neighborhood late in the day, the sun slanting low behind the battered walls, feeling both weary and strangely uplifted. This was the essence of ruling, long hours, careful judgments, an endless litany of problems great and small. She could not solve them all with one gesture. Yet if she could bring some measure of relief to these people, she would do so gladly. It was, after all, the reason she had fought such a bitter war, to break the cycle of tyranny and indifference that had strangled Westeros for far too long. By the time she returned to the Red Keep, dusk was settling. Servants bustled about, lighting torches in the courtyard and corridors. Daenerys felt the day's exhaustion weigh on her limbs, but she resisted the urge to retire immediately. Instead, she climbed a winding flight of steps to a section of ramparts overlooking Blackwater Bay, knowing she would find at least one of her dragons there. Sure enough, Regal perched atop the balustrade, his green scales gleaming in the last rays of sunlight, wings half folded, enormous eyes reflecting the orange glow of the sky. He let out a low rumble of greeting. Daenerys approached him, placing a palm against his warm flank. She relished these moments of calm with her children, these living embodiments of her house's legacy. She breathed in the salty air and gazed across the bay, where ships bobbed at anchor, some with black sails bearing the three-headed dragon, others from various houses that had sworn allegiance. Beyond lay the open sea, stretching east toward Essos, where her quest had truly begun. She thought of the Dothraki Sea, of Slaver's Bay, of that fateful night when she had emerged from Drogo's funeral pyre with 3 hatchlings clinging to her shoulders. All those memories returned in a rush, reminding her how far she had come. Behind her, footsteps echoed lightly on the stone. She turned to see Jon Snow approaching, wearing a thick cloak despite the mild southern weather. He seemed hesitant, as he often did, but his eyes found hers in the twilight. "I heard you spent the day in Flea Bottom," he said, stopping a few paces away. "It's rare for a monarch to go there in person." Daenerys tilted her head, studying him. "Should it be? If I'm to rule these people, I must know how they live and how they suffer. It's not enough to send messengers or scribes." She softened her tone. "But I know it worries my advisors. They fear for my safety." Jon nodded, stepping closer. "They just want to protect you, though I suspect you can handle yourself quite well." His gaze drifted to Rhaegal, who eyed him with curiosity. Even after their shared battle in the north, Jon remained somewhat awed by the dragons. "You didn't take them with you?" he asked, half smiling. She shook her head. "There's a time for dragons and a time for a gentler approach." Her eyes flicked over the city's rooftops. "How fare your men in the city? Do they find the climate here agreeable?" Jon sighed, crossing his arms. "They're adapting. Most of the Northmen have returned home, including many of our bannermen, to rebuild after the war against the dead. A few remain to bolster your forces, but they're uneasy in this heat. Even now, it's warmer than anything they're used to in winter." Daenerys offered a faint smile. "Then perhaps we can let them return as well. I don't want them suffering idly. If the North needs them more urgently." He waved a hand dismissively, though not rudely. "Some will go, some will stay. I think they'd like to keep a presence here out of loyalty to me and to you. For them, you're a queen who risked everything to protect the North from the Night King. They won't soon forget that." A moment of silence passed. The wind ruffled Jon's hair and tugged at Daenerys's braids. She felt the weight of unspoken thoughts between them, a tension neither entirely comfortable nor wholly unwelcome. They had fought side by side against an unimaginable horror, had faced dragons and undead, had shared in heartbreak and triumph. Now, with the living victorious, their destinies were no longer pressed together by the threat of oblivion. And yet, they still found reasons to drift into one another's presence, as though something else bound them just as tightly. "How long will you remain in King's Landing?" she asked softly, looking out over the bay again. "I'm not sure," Jon replied. "Sansa has taken on much of the governance in Winterfell, and she's very capable. Bran is busy with his own mystical duties as the three-eyed raven. Arya roams who knows where, seeing the world. I feel a responsibility to help you secure the peace here, at least for a while." Daenerys glanced back at him, her expression thoughtful. "It won't be easy. There are still lords who question my right to rule, who fear I might become my father. And some who despise the idea of bending the knee to another Targaryen, no matter how many good deeds I attempt." His mouth quirked in a faint smile. "If you were anything like your father, the city would be in ashes by now. People see the difference, even if they don't admit it freely." He paused, searching her face. "I believe you'll succeed, Daenerys." The sound of her name on his lips sent a subtle warmth through her. She found herself remembering those harrowing moments in the snows outside Winterfell when she had glimpsed him fighting in the thick of the dead, resolved and unafraid. "Thank you, Jon," she said quietly. Then, as though pulling back from the edge of some precipice, she turned her attention to Rhaegal, stroking his scales. The dragon let out a reverberating purr. "They trust you too, you know," she went on. "Rhaegal especially. He let you ride him without biting your head off, something I can't say Drogon would have allowed so readily. Perhaps that's a sign." Jon's gaze lingered on Rhaegal, a mix of wonder and lingering trepidation. "I never asked to be a dragon rider. But I can't deny the bond. Maybe it's destiny. Or blood. He hesitated, swallowing words he wasn't sure how to express. For all they had been through, there was a truth he had learned months ago, a truth about his parentage that still weighed on him. Daenerys understood it too well. He was Aegon Targaryen, her nephew by blood, though neither had known it when they first allied. The knowledge had slipped into their shared consciousness after the war in the north, but events had moved so swiftly. Cersei's threat, the final battles, that they had never truly spoken of it, never let themselves dwell on the complicated implications. Even now, the revelation hung between them like a half-shuttered door. Fate had thrust them together in ways both triumphant and deeply troubling. But for this moment, neither forced that door open. Daenerys withdrew her hand from Rhaegal's side and let it drop to her cloak, clasping it around her shoulders. "Let's go inside," she said, gently changing the subject. "There's food in the hall, and I'm starving." Jon nodded, seeming equally relieved to step away from the awkward thoughts that weighed on him. Together, they made their way down from the ramparts, leaving Rhaegal behind to watch the last colors of twilight fade into night. In the weeks that followed, Daenerys's rule in King's Landing settled into a rhythm of careful governance. Tyrion worked closely with the Iron Bank's emissaries, forging a delicate repayment schedule that would not beggar the kingdom. Dorne's envoys arrived, led by a solemn Lady Nymella Toland, and hammered out an agreement for semi-autonomy under the crown's overarching authority. Gendry Baratheon, legitimized by royal decree, took up residence in Storm's End, quickly winning the approval of many of the local lords who valued the return of a Baratheon presence. The new Warden of the Stormlands, as Daenerys named him, pledged his fealty wholeheartedly. Cersei Lannister languished in a tower cell, stripped of her regalia and bitter with every passing day. The city had expected a public execution, and some demanded it, recalling her many atrocities. But Daenerys refused to indulge in bloody spectacle. A trial had been held, the verdict pronounced, and a life sentence of imprisonment declared. From time to time, rumors surfaced that Qyburn, also in custody though in a separate wing, plotted some twisted scheme to free her, but no such scheme manifested. The Red Keep's guards kept vigilant watch, and Grey Worm took personal responsibility for ensuring no guard was bribed or coerced. The lords of Westeros gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy, albeit one overshadowed by the scars of war. Some recognized Daenerys as the rightful queen not just out of fear of dragons, but out of genuine gratitude for her role in defeating the Night King. Others bided their time, uncertain whether her reforms threatened their comfortable old ways. Daenerys was well aware that some among the nobility disliked her stance on fair taxation or the increased autonomy she granted local councils. But with her dragons at her side and the unwavering loyalty of the Unsullied, open rebellion seemed unlikely to flourish. She worked tirelessly on forging new ties with the faith. Though her father had earned the enmity of the faith militant generations ago and Cersei had incinerated the September of Baelor, Daenerys sought to mend the relationship. She funded the reconstruction of a new sept in the city, albeit on a smaller scale than the one lost to wildfire. The High Septon, an old man whose appointment postdated the war, cautiously blessed her rule, acknowledging the Targaryen tradition of forging alliances with the faith when possible. Daenerys did not feign devoutness she did not feel, but she understood that a level of mutual respect with the people's spiritual leaders could prevent future unrest. As the realm stabilized, other challenges pressed upon her. The plight of smallfolk refugees who had fled the fighting in the north weighed heavily on her mind. Camps outside King's Landing housed hundreds, if not thousands, struggling to find permanent shelter or farmland. Daenerys directed resources from the treasury to purchase lands in the Riverlands and settle these refugees there, hoping to revitalize neglected fields in the process. With Tyrion's help, she brokered agreements with local lords to provide seed and livestock in exchange for future taxes once the farmland produced crops. It was a delicate negotiation, one that demanded trust on both sides. Amid all these political maneuvers, Daenerys found her personal life in a strange limbo. She often dined with Jon Snow, sometimes in the presence of Tyrion and Missandei, other times alone. Late conversations meandered from the practicalities of rule to the ghosts of their past, siblings lost, friends buried, loyalties tested. Daenerys was aware of a growing warmth in these moments, a sense of closeness that neither of them had truly sought, yet could not deny. And beneath it all lay the question of his parentage, which still hovered in the periphery. He had not pressed a claim, indeed he seemed determined not to. But the knowledge was there. It was part of the tapestry of their bond, complicated, quietly potent, and not easily resolved. One evening, after a long day spent in negotiations with visiting lords from the Reach, Daenerys retreated to her private solar. She found herself restless despite her fatigue. The flicker of candlelight played across the walls. The open window admitted a gentle breeze from the bay, carrying the distant sound of gulls. She turned when she sensed another presence. Jon had come, standing in the doorframe, uncertainty on his face. It had become more common for him to visit her at odd hours, sometimes to discuss a pressing issue, sometimes just to share a fleeting moment of peace. She waved him in. He entered, letting the door close softly. "I won't stay long," he said, voice low. "I can see you're weary." She nodded, sinking into a cushioned chair. "I'm more weary of lords who posture and prattle endlessly. They seem to believe the realm belongs only to them." Jon gave a small, empathetic smile. "And how does your council plan to appease them this time? By dancing on a razor's edge? Promising them enough freedom to feel secure, but not so much that they ignore the crown's authority?" She shook her head. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm swimming against a tide of centuries-old tradition. They want a ruler, but only if that ruler does exactly as they say." Jon settled across from her. "You're changing the shape of the realm, little by little. That's bound to unsettle them." She allowed herself a moment of candor. "I never doubted I could conquer Westeros. With 3 dragons and an army, that part was inevitable. But building something better, truly better, this is the real test, isn't it?" "Yes," Jon said softly. "But you're not alone." There was a pause, the soft crackle of the hearth filling the silence. Then he cleared his throat. "The small folk in the north, they speak of you. Not always kindly, some still mistrust Targaryens, but many remember you arriving on dragons to help fight the dead. They call you the Dragon Queen, sometimes even the savior of the north." She pursed her lips. "Savior? I prefer they save themselves with our guidance. I don't want them reliant on me, waiting for my dragons to solve every problem." Jon leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Let them have their stories, Daenerys. Hope is precious. And a good story can help people believe the future might be kinder than the past." He looked at her in the flickering light, expression unguarded. "You gave them that hope?" She felt a gentle flush. She remembered nights in Meereen when she had questioned every choice, doubted her capacity to rule, only to push onward with the conviction that she must. It felt strange and comforting to hear someone else affirm that conviction. Without thinking, she reached across the small space between them and placed a hand on his. His fingers curled slightly around hers. For a moment, words were unnecessary. The hush of the room, the steady glow of the fire, the hush of distant waves lapping against the city's harbor, these became the only truths. But as quickly as the moment came, Daenerys felt the old caution stirring. She remembered the swirl of rumors that had dogged them once, the uncertain mixture of love and lineage that had overshadowed their bond when the truth of Jon's parentage first emerged. She withdrew her hand gently, not wanting to break the mood entirely, yet unwilling to ignore the complexities. "We have time," she said, almost to herself, "to shape the realm. To shape whatever this is." Jon nodded, understanding unspoken. "Yes, we do." He rose after a moment, and she followed him to the door. They parted with a shared look and unvoiced promise that whatever the realm demanded of them, they would face it together. When the door closed behind him, Daenerys stood in the quiet solar, her heart beating a little faster than before. The next few months brought a sense of guarded optimism to Westeros. With the mortal threat of the White Walkers gone and Cersei's tyranny ended, trade routes reopened. King's Landing streets slowly cleaned up and new markets flourished. Word spread of Daenerys's reforms, structured taxes instead of arbitrary levies, crown-sponsored relief for war-torn regions, a push to restore the old roads connecting each kingdom. Some lords bristled at the idea of investing in public works when they could instead line their own purses, but the crown's stance was firm. The more stable the roads, the more merchants would travel, thus the richer every region would become over time. Tyrion was in his element, orchestrating the details. Missandei, with her gift for languages and negotiation, handled communications with foreign traders, ensuring alliances in Essos did not wither. Varys's little birds kept watch for plots, though surprisingly few surfaced. The realm was too exhausted for wide-scale rebellion. The occasional band of sellswords or outlaws caused trouble, but Grey Worm and the Unsullied, aided by the reformed City Watch, stamped out such brigandage quickly. The dragons spent their days hunting in the surrounding fields or basking on the high walls of the Red Keep. They never ventured far without Daenerys's knowledge. Sometimes she would fly with them at daybreak, a habit she had formed in Essos and refused to relinquish. The sight of a queen on dragonback became a potent symbol of Targaryen. Power returned, but also an emblem of security, for she did not use them to lay waste to villages or terrorize the innocent. The presence of 3 dragons, all healthy and unbroken, served as a living testament to the realm's new chance at prosperity. Bards sang about the time the dead marched and were turned to ash by the Dragon Queen's brood, weaving myth and truth until even Daenerys found it difficult to separate them. Amid these more hopeful days, however, one final knot demanded Daenerys's attention: the Lannister legacy. Tywin Lannister had built a fearsome reputation for his house, but now Cersei was imprisoned, Jaime's loyalties had shifted, and Tyrion was her hand. What of the Westerlands themselves? Casterly Rock, Lannisport, and the lesser houses sworn to the Lion? Word came that some Lannister bannermen were reluctant to accept a queen who had imprisoned their once reigning lady. Many quietly resented Tyrion, seeing him as a traitor to his own blood. Others had already bowed, acknowledging reality. But the Westerlands held the richest gold mines in the kingdom, though some were rumored near depletion, and their fealty was essential if Daenerys' governance was to remain stable. Tyrion approached her one afternoon while she walked along the ramparts, gazing at the bustling city below. "Your Grace," he said, in that careful tone he used for delicate matters, "I've received a request from my brother, Jaime. He's at Casterly Rock, trying to bring the region into compliance with your decrees. He suggests that a royal progress might be in order. You, traveling there in person to show that you harbor no ill will toward the people of the Westerlands. Perhaps you could quell their fears and confirm a new Warden of the West." Daenerys turned, her hair lifting in a soft breeze. "A royal progress," she echoed. "I recall the histories. My ancestor Aegon the Conqueror made such journeys to solidify his rule. Robert Baratheon did so as well, though his reasons were less than admirable. And I remember how my father rarely left the Red Keep in his later years, festering in paranoia. It might help," Tyrion pressed gently. "My family's reputation is in tatters for good reason. But the region itself is full of proud, stubborn people. A direct show of good faith might go a long way." Daenerys considered. Traveling with her dragons and a retinue of loyal guards into the heart of Lannister territory was not without risk. But fear alone had never stopped her. "Very well," she said. "We'll prepare a suitable escort. And I'd like you to come, of course, as well as Grey Worm for security. Missandei can remain in King's Landing to manage affairs in our absence." Tyrion bowed. "I'll begin the arrangements. We can travel by land, let the realm see you in person, or by sea. The choice is yours." "Land," she decided. "I want to see the state of the towns and holdfasts along the way to hear their needs directly. We'll bring enough supplies to avoid burdening them." Tyrion smiled. "As you say, Your Grace." She touched his arm before he turned away. "Tyrion, I know this can't be easy for you. Returning to Casterly Rock after all that's happened." A shadow flickered across his features. "No, it won't be easy at all. But if we can help the people there, and remind them that House Lannister isn't condemned to shame forever, I'll endure it." Daenerys squeezed his arm in silent sympathy, then let him go to make preparations. She stood on the ramparts a moment longer, feeling the sun on her face, a swirl of apprehension in her gut. A journey west would be more than a simple tour. It would be a symbolic bridging of old wounds. And in Westeros, old wounds ran deep indeed. Within a fortnight, the royal procession was ready. Daenerys set out with a moderate entourage. A column of Unsullied for protection, a company of loyal knights from the Crownlands, a handful of northern riders who had stayed behind, and Tyrion himself as hand. Jon Snow elected to come as well, citing a desire to see how the West fared and to lend moral support. The dragons soared overhead, though Daenerys insisted they hunt for themselves and not trouble the local villages. Where possible, she intended to keep their presence from becoming a terror to the small folk. Those who saw them overhead would likely feel both fear and awe, but at least they would not see their fields scorched. The journey took them through the Riverlands first. Along the way, Daenerys made stops at small holdfasts, listening to petitions from farmers and lesser lords. Though the region had suffered terribly during the War of the Five Kings, it was beginning to heal. She passed through the outskirts of Harrenhal, that cursed fortress of melted towers, and a hush fell over her column as they regarded its blackened spires. Locals whispered that it was haunted by the ghosts of Aegon, the Conqueror's dragon, Balerion the Black Dread, who had turned Harrenhal's massive walls into weeping stones centuries ago. Standing there, Daenerys felt a strange sense of connection across time. A Targaryen on Dragonback once more in these lands, but with a different heart, a different aim. She offered no destruction. In truth, the great castle was all but deserted, owned in name by some minor lord who seldom set foot within its walls. They pressed on, crossing the hills that marked the boundary of the Westerlands. The terrain grew rockier, with gold-tinged stone visible in some of the cliffs. They encountered more Lannister banners, though the soldiers who wore them kept a respectful distance, uncertain how to greet the queen. Tyrion would wave them closer, speak a few words, and most left with uneasy but polite inclinations of the head. At night, Daenerys camped under the stars, recalling her Khalasar days. Sometimes the dragons roost in the nearby hills, their silhouettes visible against the moon. Finally, the towering fortress of Casterly Rock came into view. Perched on a rocky promontory overlooking the sea, it was an imposing seat, ancient, proud, and steeped in the wealth of House Lannister. Red banners still hung from its parapets, though fewer than might have in the days before war and upheaval. Daenerys observed it from a distance with mixed emotions. Here was the heart of her greatest rival's power, the red lion that had so often overshadowed the stag and the wolf in recent memory. Now, the lion was toothless, or was it? Jaime Lannister emerged from the gates to greet them, accompanied by a small honor guard. He still wore polished plate, bearing the lion's sigil on his breastplate, but his golden hand caught the evening sun, gleaming with a subdued luster. His face was solemn, but he inclined his head respectfully before Daenerys. "Your Grace," he said, a slight tremor betraying old habits of pride. "Welcome to Casterly Rock." Tyrion dismounted and approached his brother, the two exchanging a tight embrace. Daenerys watched, recalling that once these men had stood on opposite sides in the war. Now they sought to salvage what remained of their house, guided by the queen who had dethroned their sister. The paradox was not lost on her. She dismounted next, placing a hand on Drogon's flank as he crouched so she could step safely to the ground. The dragon hissed softly, scanning the courtyard. Rhaegal and Viserion circled overhead, stirring the wind with each flap of their wings, their roars echoing against the ancient walls. Daenerys noted the wide-eyed stares of the castle guards. Let them stare, she thought. Let them know I come not as a destroyer, but with the power to do so if compelled. Jaime gestured to the fortress. "My queen, we've prepared chambers for you and your retinue. The rock is yours." Daenerys inclined her head, her expression composed. "Thank you, Lord Jaime." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I hope to speak with the local lords soon to assure them that I come in peace." He nodded. "They're wary, but they'll listen." A faint ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You'll find the Westerlands are as proud as anywhere, but the memory of the wars is still fresh. Many are tired of conflict, tired of burying the dead." She caught a subtle tension in his gaze. Perhaps he thought of the bodies strewn across King's Landing, or the horrors beyond the wall. "Then let us offer them reason to hope," she said gently. Inside, Casterly Rock impressed her as a fortress hewn from the living stone, its corridors lit by torches and stained glass windows depicting lions in glorious scenes. Gold filigree adorned the walls. Once it might have seemed opulent, but she sensed a dullness now, like a grand tapestry left to gather dust. The castle staff greeted her politely, if not warmly, and scurried to accommodate her retinue. Daenerys was shown to a set of chambers large enough to house her personal guards, with a spacious balcony that overlooked the sea. Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion perched on an outcropping of rock just beyond the outer walls, scanning the waves below as though they found the seascape intriguing. That evening, a feast was held in the Great Hall. The local bannermen and minor lords of the Westerlands arrived, suspicious but drawn by curiosity. Tyrion orchestrated the seating arrangements, ensuring Daenerys occupied the dais with Jaime on one side, Jon Snow on her other, and various notables arranged below. The meal was simple but hearty. Roast boar, fresh fish from Lannisport, vegetables from local fields. Daenerys sensed the tension in the air as she sipped watered wine. The Lannister men eyed her dragons through the high windows, occasionally twitching at the distant roars. She smiled inwardly. Fear was not the tool she most wished to employ, but neither would she let them imagine she was helpless. When the meal was halfway done, Daenerys rose from her seat, quieting the murmurs in the hall. She let her gaze sweep across the gathered faces, recognizing suspicion, caution, a few glimmers of curiosity. She spoke in a measured tone. "Lords and ladies of the Westerlands, I thank you for your hospitality here at Casterly Rock. I know the times have been turbulent. Many of you lost kin in the wars, some under Lannister banners, some under Baratheon or Stark. Some were wounded in battles fought against armies of the dead. We have all bled." She paused, letting that truth settle. "I come not to punish you for following the only queen you knew, but to ask you to help rebuild a realm that has seen too much grief. In the Crownlands, we've begun repairing roads and ensuring fair treatment of peasants. In the north, the land recovers from the devastation of the White Walkers. Here, you have your own challenges, mines that yield less gold than before, fields that must be replanted, and families that need reassurance their losses weren't in vain." Her voice gained a faint edge of warmth. "My father, the Mad King, wounded the realm deeply. I will not deny his madness. But I am not my father. I bring dragons, yes, but I do not bring the cruelty he displayed. If you doubt my intentions, ask those who saw me fight for the living beyond the wall, or those in King's Landing who see me striving each day to prevent hunger and restore order. A hush fell over the hall. Daenerys lifted her chin, letting the torchlight catch in her silver-gold braids. I ask only for your honest allegiance and your willingness to build a better future. My hand, Tyrion Lannister, knows your ways well. Lord Jaime Lannister has sworn to uphold peace under my reign. I encourage you to speak freely with them and with me. If you have grievances, voice them. If you have ideas, share them. The Iron Throne stands for all of Westeros, not just a privileged few. She surveyed the crowd, her posture regal but approachable. Then she resumed her seat. A ripple of uncertain applause rose among the lesser lords as though they felt compelled to offer some gesture of approval. Jaime exchanged a glance with Tyrion, who gave a small nod as if to say, "That's as good a start as we could hope for." Jon Snow caught Daenerys' eye and offered a subtle, encouraging smile. Over the next several days, Daenerys and her advisors conducted meetings with these Westerland's lords. Many spoke of fears that the region would lose its influence in the new order, that their gold mines were nearly spent, that their trade routes needed fresh impetus. Daenerys listened carefully, inviting Tyrion to propose solutions. He suggested lower tariffs on goods traveling from Lannisport to King's Landing, a revamp of older mining operations that might yield silver or iron if not gold, and an investment in new crafts, smithing, weaving, shipbuilding. That could employ local folk once the mines dried up. The lords were skeptical but intrigued. Over time, as Daenerys presented fair terms and promised crown support for these initiatives, some measure of trust began to take root. In private, Jaime took Daenerys through the halls of Casterly Rock, showing her the old seat of House Lannister in all its faded glory. She saw the tombs of Lannister ancestors, the grand crypt where Tywin Lannister's remains had once lain before Cersei had them moved. She felt the echoes of centuries. At one point, Jaime paused by a tall window overlooking the sea. "My sister would never have let you pass these gates without a fight," he said quietly. "And if you had come here with an army, you might have found war waiting." Daenerys gazed at him in the golden light. "Perhaps. But war is the last thing I want now. We've had our share of ashes." He nodded, metal fingers tapping the hilt of his sword in a subdued gesture. "You spared the city, spared many who might have deserved your wrath. I'm grateful for that." She studied him, recalling how he had once been the Kingslayer, how he had pushed Bran Stark from a tower, how he had stood as one of her enemies at the field of fire near the Rose Road. People could change, she reminded herself. Hadn't she once freed slavers in Yunkai, only to see some of them become allies? "Have you found peace here, Jaime?" she asked softly. He exhaled, turning to gaze out the window. I'm trying to atone in my own way. I stay up at night thinking of what I could have done differently, how I let my love for Cersei blind me to so much suffering." He fell silent for a beat. "But if I can help rebuild, if I can keep these lands from falling into chaos, that will be something." Daenerys laid a hand on his arm, empathizing with the weight of regret. She wondered how many across the realm carried similar burdens, haunted by choices made in an age of turmoil. It solidified her resolve to ensure that no new war erupted. She had always believed in breaking cycles. This was just another cycle. Lannister pride and Targaryen vengeance, locked in a spiral for generations, that she wished to see ended. Toward the end of her stay, she summoned a gathering of the major lords in the courtyard, along with local townspeople. There, under the watchful eyes of her dragons perched on the battlements, she formally appointed one of the more open-minded local nobles, Lord Adam Craighall, as Warden of the West, with Jaime Lannister to serve as her liaison at Casterly Rock. The choice had been discussed at length. Picking a Lannister for Warden might stir old resentments, while picking someone outside the region entirely could spark new outrage. Craighall was known for competence and loyalty to House Lannister in the past, but had signaled genuine willingness to serve Daenerys. The announcement was met with a mixture of relief and cautious acceptance. That night, a modest celebration was held in the castle yard, with minstrels playing and a cask of decent Dornish wine opened. Daenerys roamed among the guests, exchanging pleasantries, while Grey Worm and a detail of Unsullied kept a discreet watch. Jon Snow lingered near her, answering occasional questions from curious knights about the North's rebuilding efforts. Tyrion flitted from cluster to cluster, ever the diplomat, ensuring no one felt neglected. Eventually, Daenerys slipped away from the bustle, stepping onto a parapet with a view of the ocean. The crashing waves reflected the moon's glow. She inhaled the salt air, letting the sound soothe her. Another corner of Westeros was now tentatively aligned with her reign. Another step toward a unified realm that might just have a chance at lasting peace. Footsteps behind her. She turned to find Jon approaching. The torches below cast dancing shadows on the stone, illuminating his solemn face. He leaned against the parapet beside her. For a moment, they simply watched the waves, the hush of nighttime settling around them. "You've done well here," he said quietly. "I think they see you for what you are now, a queen who rules with more than just fear and blood. Even in the West, that message is spreading." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I hope so. They've known the Lannisters for so long. It will take time before they truly trust a Targaryen on the throne." He nodded thoughtfully. "Trust is never immediate. It's earned, day by day." A comfortable silence settled. She felt the warmth of him at her side, remembered the electricity of his presence from nights in Winterfell. In a realm that demanded so much of them, these small private moments felt like a luxury. She turned her gaze to him. "When we return to King's Landing, the realm won't suddenly be mended. We'll have more disputes, more demands, more unrest. Do you ever wish to lay down that burden?" His dark eyes flicked to hers. "Sometimes, but it wouldn't do any good. Our people need us even if they'd never say it outright. You and I, we've seen what happens when leaders abandon their duty." She exhaled softly, remembering the chaos of Slaver's Bay when she had momentarily left Meereen. "That is true." She hesitated. "And what about your secret? The one that binds you to my house by blood?" He stiffened slightly. The wind carried the faint tang of salt. "I haven't told anyone else," he said. "Sansa and Arya know, of course, but they've kept it quiet. We agreed that if I were to stake a claim, it would split the realm. And I have no intention of doing that." Daenerys's throat constricted. This was the conversation they had both been avoiding for so long. What you choose to do with that truth will shape your life. If you keep it hidden, you deny part of who you are. If you proclaim it, you risk dividing the 7 kingdoms. Jon's gaze swept over her face, searching. "And what of you? Does it trouble you that I have a Targaryen name by birth?" She opened her mouth, closed it again. She remembered the swirl of confusion when she first learned of his lineage, how it had threatened to uproot everything, her claim, her sense of identity. But months had passed, battles fought, alliances forged. "Once, perhaps, it would have threatened me," she admitted softly. "But now I don't see you as a threat. I see you as someone the realm needs, whether as a king in the north or as the man who rides beside me. I don't want to lose you to fear of what might happen." Emotion flickered in his eyes, something raw and unguarded. He reached out and took her hand, the calluses of his palm rough against her skin. "We've stood together against the worst horrors. I won't abandon you. Not now, not ever." He drew a breath. "If the time comes when we need to tell the realm the truth, we'll face that choice together. But for now, let them see us as allies, maybe more. Let them see us shape a realm worth living in." She squeezed his hand, her heart thudding. The ghost of an old taboo lingered in her mind. Targaryens had wed brother to sister for centuries, and this was not so distant from that practice if one looked at the bloodline strictly. But the realm had seen enough strife. The question of her father's madness and the illusions of genealogical purity no longer guided her. She wanted simply to build a life free of the ghosts that had haunted her. And standing there under the moonlight, the surf roaring far below, she felt that with Jon, such a life might be possible. No more words were needed. They shared a quiet moment, the intimacy of their joined hands bridging the unspoken distance between them. Above, Rhaegal soared against the moonlit sky, letting out a muffled roar that resonated over the waves. And Daenerys Stormborn felt, for the first time in years, that she might have both the throne and the happiness she once thought impossible. By the time Daenerys's procession departed Casterly Rock and began the return journey east, she carried with her more than just new agreements and a warden for the West. She carried hope that the realm was slowly turning a corner, away from the old feuds, away from the catastrophic wars of the past. They traveled along the coastal road for part of the journey, letting the sea breezes and sweeping vistas provide a welcome reprieve from dusty inland tracks. Fishing villages dotted the shores, and Daenerys often stopped to greet the locals, ensuring their needs were heard. One afternoon, they reached a headland overlooking a wide stretch of beach. The day was clear, the sky a brilliant blue. Daenerys felt a surge of exhilaration. She commanded Drogon to land on the sands, and the rest of the column followed on horseback. The dragons trotted eagerly over the surf, leaving massive footprints in the wet sand. Once dismounted, Daenerys removed her boots, letting the tide wash over her feet. A sense of childlike wonder arose in her. How many times had she ridden through deserts, soared above grasslands, yet never simply strolled a Westerosi shoreline? Jon Snow followed suit, albeit more cautiously, removing his own boots and wincing slightly at the cool water. Soldiers and advisors hovered at a respectful distance, while Tyrion gave them a knowing glance and busied himself checking the map, letting them have a moment of relative solitude. Daenerys laughed softly at Jon's discomfort. "Is the water too warm for you, Northerner?" He shook his head, a small smirk tugging at his lips. "It's still colder than I expected. But better than ice, I'll grant you that." They walked side by side, letting the wind whip at their hair and clothing. Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion frolicked in their own way, splashing tails and testing the shallows. The sea breeze tasted of salt, the sunlight glimmering on the waves. For a brief moment, they were not queen and king, not the last Targaryens in Westeros, but simply two people who had survived impossible odds. Then Daenerys noticed a commotion further up the beach. Grey Worm and a few Unsullied had fanned out, weapons partially raised. She tensed, expecting an ambush, but when she and Jon approached, they found a group of local fishermen kneeling in the sand, terror etched on their faces at the sight of dragons. The fishermen were older men, lean from years at sea, their nets cast aside. They must have been gathering shellfish or mending gear when the dragons landed. Daenerys motioned for the Unsullied to lower their weapons. She approached with open palms, speaking gently. "There's no need to fear," she said, voice carrying over the rush of the surf. "We won't harm you or your village. Rise." One man peered up, half trembling, and gradually found the courage to stand. "My lady, my queen," he stammered, uncertain of the correct address. "We saw the shadows overhead, thought the old stories had come back to haunt us." "Old stories?" He swallowed, glancing at her silver hair and the dragons behind her. That the Targaryens had returned, bringing doom and fire. "But you're here." Daenerys took a step closer, aware of Jon by her side. "I am Daenerys Targaryen, yes. But I don't come to bring doom. I'm only passing through." The fisherman hesitated, then bowed again, more out of nervous habit than duty. "Forgive us. We've never seen a dragon, or three." Jon offered a small, reassuring smile. "They're a sight, aren't they? But they won't trouble you." Daenerys asked if their village needed anything, if their catches were good, if the taxes laid upon them were fair. The men glanced at each other, still anxious but emboldened by her calm. One spoke of a difficult season, storms that had decimated their boats. Another mentioned that brigands occasionally prowled the coast, stealing fish or demanding tribute. Daenerys listened intently, making a mental note to inform local lords or the city watch once they returned. She thanked the fishermen and urged them to carry on. When she turned away, she glimpsed their faces, easing from fear to cautious admiration. A queen with dragons who asked about their hardships, that alone was worth a tale around the hearth. She and Jon continued their stroll along the beach, once again letting the distance from the main column offer a modicum of privacy. There was a glow in Daenerys's chest that she recognized as a mixture of pride and humility, pride that she could make a difference, humility that so many placed their hopes in her. The waves rolled in and out, leaving shells glimmering on the wet sand. After a long silence, Jon spoke. "You've done so much to alleviate suffering, yet sometimes I wonder how you bear the weight of all these expectations." She stepped over a bit of seaweed, considering his words. "Some days it feels like too much. But I remember how it felt to be powerless, to be sold like a piece of chattel. And I swore never to let that feeling consume me again, or let it consume others if I could help it." He nodded, gazing toward the horizon. "I was never sold, but I was ignored. A bastard in a lord's household. Not truly a Stark, not truly accepted as one of the family, though Ned Stark was kinder than most. It shaped me, made me value loyalty, the sense of belonging." Daenerys felt a surge of compassion. "When we stand together," she said, "we make each other stronger. You taught me that in the north." He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "I'm glad you came. Sometimes I still can't believe we survived." They reached a rocky outcrop where the beach narrowed. She turned to face him, a teasing glint in her eye. "Care to climb that and see the view?" She pointed to a low cliff about 30 feet high. Jon half laughed. "You may regret that challenge. I've climbed a wall many times higher." Daenerys arched an eyebrow. "Then lead on, my lord." With that, they began a playful scramble up the rocks, boots in hand. The stones were slick, but not so steep as to be truly dangerous. Grey Worm, noticing their detour, positioned the Unsullied at a slight distance, ensuring the queen was still within sight but granting her space. In short order, Daenerys and Jon crested the top of the outcrop, panting lightly. Below, the beach and their traveling columns spread out like a tableau, the dragons visible in the shallows. Further in the distance, hills rolled toward farmland. Jon reached the top first, extending a hand to help Daenerys the last step. She accepted, letting him pull her up beside him. The wind caught her hair, sending a salty spray across her cheeks. She turned, her gaze sweeping the horizon. The midday sun gilded everything in a radiant light, from the waves to the dragon's scales. It was beautiful, a moment free of the usual burdens. Without overthinking, Daenerys leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to Jon's lips. A brief, impulsive gesture. He blinked in surprise but responded, his grip on her arm gentle yet firm. For an instant, time seemed suspended. The tang of salt, the warmth of the sun, the beating of her heart all fused into a single sensation of belonging. She pulled back, breath unsteady. He looked at her, eyes full of something that might have been longing, might have been relief. "Daenerys," he murmured, but she laid a finger to his lips. "It's all right," she whispered. "We're here, alive. Let's not question this moment." He swallowed, then nodded. They stood there, the breeze tugging at their garments, the gulls crying overhead. Eventually, they climbed down, rejoining the waiting retinue. Neither spoke of the kiss aloud, but its memory lingered between them like a warm ember nestled under layers of practical duty. The royal column reached King's Landing a week later, welcomed by the sight of the Red Keep rising above the city. The approach was markedly different from Daenerys's first arrival. Where once suspicion and fear might have been the norm, now curious onlookers lined the streets, some waving small flags bearing the Targaryen sigil. Others simply stared, bowing or calling out thanks. A group of children cheered as the dragons soared overhead, their roars echoing across rooftops. Daenerys waved, smiling despite her fatigue. Tyrion rode beside her, smiling as well, evidently pleased by the city's improving morale. Missandei greeted them at the gates, looking relieved that the progress had gone smoothly. "Welcome back, Your Grace," she said, bowing. "There's much to catch up on, letters from Dorne, a missive from Braavos about new trade arrangements, and a matter involving a group of Iron Islanders wanting to pledge themselves to your fleet." Daenerys dismounted and handed the reins to a stable hand. "I'll see to all of it," she said, forcing herself not to succumb to weariness. "Summon the small council in the morning. For now, let's just breathe." Missandei smiled in understanding. "Of course." She slipped into her role of quietly organizing matters, leading the retinue into the keep. Jon parted from Daenerys with a brief, meaningful look, heading to the quarters prepared for him. Grey Worm dispersed the Unsullied. Tyrion retreated to his own chambers, no doubt to sample some wine before tomorrow's session. Daenerys made her way to her private rooms, noticing that the Red Keep felt almost familiar now, like a home, not a hostile fortress. The corridors were still lined with Targaryen banners, proud reminders of her house's restoration, but some of the gloom once clinging to these walls had lifted. Servants bustled about with more confidence, no longer cringing at every shadow. When she finally entered her solar, she found a brazier burning warmly, a pitcher of fresh water on the table. She sank onto a cushioned chair, letting out a long sigh. Home, such as it was. After a few moments, she rose to remove her traveling cloak and boots. She was about to call for a maid to help her out of her riding leathers when a soft knock came at the door. "Come in," she said, curious. The door opened to reveal Jon, freshly washed but still dressed in simple dark clothes. He stepped inside, hesitating a moment. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." She shook her head, something fluttering in her stomach. "Not at all. Please sit." He remained standing a moment longer, meeting her gaze with quiet intensity. Then, as though some invisible barrier gave way, they closed the distance between them in a swift, unspoken understanding. Their earlier kiss on the cliff had cracked open a door they could no longer ignore. They embraced, the tension of unvoiced desires melting away. She tasted the salt of his skin, felt the warmth of his arms, the slow thunder of his heartbeat. The time for caution was gone, at least in this private moment. They had survived wars, walked through fire and ice, they had stood by each other's side when the realm needed them most. Here, alone, they could admit that they also needed each other. Hours later, as the candles burned low, Daenerys found herself lying awake, Jon's warmth beside her. She stared at the ceiling, her mind churning. The realm, the Targaryen legacy, the unspoken complexities of their bond, it all came crashing in. But she felt a quiet certainty too, a calm that whispered they would face it. Together. The ghosts of bloodlines and the burdens of rule no longer seemed insurmountable. She traced a pattern on Jon's arm with her fingertips, feeling him half stir in response, then drift back to a light doze. Outside, the city was quiet but not silent. She could hear distant horns from the harbor, the calls of night watchmen, the hush of waves against the shore. Eventually, sleep claimed her as well, lulled by the steady, reassuring presence at her side. And in her dreams she saw dragons soaring not over burning cities, but over fields green with renewal, over a realm that no longer trembled at the mention of the name Targaryen. A realm in which she walked unafraid among her people, hand in hand with the man who had once been called the bastard of Winterfell, but who she knew carried a truer name and a still brighter destiny. If some old tongues would call that destiny forbidden, so be it. She had defied the norms of Essos, she had shattered the chains of tyrants, she would not let tradition's shadow deny her the happiness she had found in love. The following months were a study in hard-earned stability. Daenerys and Jon shared their lives discreetly at first, aware that the realm had scarcely recovered from its last wave of rumors and conflicts. Word undoubtedly spread among the servants, such secrets never stayed wholly hidden, but no official announcement was made. Tyrion, observant as ever, asked no direct questions, though his amusement at certain moments betrayed that he suspected. Missandei offered a gentle smile and no commentary, loyal in her discretion. Grey Worm remained outwardly stoic, but Daenerys sensed that he found solace in her quiet contentment after all the heartbreak they had suffered in war. Amid the everyday demands of governance, Daenerys noticed her own heart lightening. She carried out her queenly duties with renewed vigor, attending sessions of the small council, hearing petitions from merchants and farmers, drafting new legal edicts to ensure fairer trade across the realm. The mastery she had once shown in navigating the politics of Meereen was brought to bear here, tempered by the counsel of Tyrion, the espionage of Varys, and her own personal experiences of hardship. Jon often joined these sessions, offering perspectives shaped by the North's traditions. More than once, his plain-spoken honesty cut through the convoluted arguments of southern lords. Each victory, no matter how small, the settlement of a border dispute, the establishment of a new farmland project, the opening of trade routes to Essos felt like a milestone in proving that her rule was no fleeting conquest. She was not Ares reincarnate, nor a queen who would gorge on adulation without giving back. Occasionally, she even laughed at the notion that a queen with 3 dragons could show such patience in mundane matters. But she saw the necessity. Power untempered by wisdom was a disease she refused to inherit. There were, of course, challenges. The Iron Bank continued to press for timely repayments, necessitating further negotiations. The Vale's young Lord Robin was fickle and easily swayed by courtiers who disliked Targaryen rule, requiring careful diplomacy to keep the region from withdrawing its support. The Iron Islands under Yara Greyjoy chafed at times, demanding more autonomy on the seas. The faithful in the new sept sometimes bristled at a queen perceived as foreign and overshadowed by dragonfire. But these sparks of discontent did not erupt into flames of war. The realm was, if not wholly content, then at least far from open rebellion. On a personal level, Daenerys found comfort in small joys. She rode her dragons regularly, often taking Jon with her on Regal. Together, they soared beyond the Blackwater, scanning the horizon for hours, occasionally landing on a deserted shore or a quiet meadow. The wind in her hair, the roar of wings. These flights reminded her of the unshackled days in Essos. Yet now she had a partner who understood the burdens of their shared destiny. Their bond grew deeper with each flight, each shared secret, each stolen moment in the Red Keep's corridors. Inevitably, the question of heirs arose. Courtiers whispered about marriage alliances, not just for Daenerys but for her close allies. Many assumed the queen would eventually take a consort, someone of high birth, perhaps from a powerful house, to solidify alliances. Some lords even dared to present suggestions, though they did so cautiously. Daenerys brushed them aside with polite evasions, focusing instead on the realm's pressing needs. But she could see the day approaching when she would have to make her stance public. Whether she intended to remain unmarried, or to formalize her partnership with Jon, or to consider any other arrangement. She knew that half the lords would want a grand royal wedding, half of them would fear the Targaryen bloodline continuing. And the underlying truth of Jon's parentage lay coiled like a sleeping dragon. One word to the realm and everything might change. possibly for the better, possibly rending the realm anew. For now, they lived in a delicate balance. On a rainy evening in early autumn, Daenerys finished her council duties earlier than usual. Thunder rumbled over King's Landing, and she recalled how, in Essos, storms felt like cleansing moments, washing away the dust of a parched land. Here, the city streets were awash in puddles, the gloom broken by torchlight shimmering on wet cobblestones. She retreated to her private solar, hoping Jon would find her there once he was done overseeing an inspection of the city watch. She had arranged fresh candles and a simple supper of bread, cheese, and spiced wine. An almost domestic gesture in a world so often filled with pomp. The door opened and Jon stepped in, his cloak dripping with rain. He shook off the water, running a hand through his damp hair. "It's a downpour out there," he said, glancing at the table's modest spread. "A meal by candlelight?" She gave him a playful look. "You prefer to dine in the courtyard, soaking wet?" He managed a smile, unbuckling his sword belt. "I'd prefer not." He crossed the room and bent to brush a kiss to her temple, a gesture that had become habit for them in private. She felt the coolness of the rain on his skin. They settled at the table, the thunder outside a distant growl. The flicker of candlelight caught the planes of Jon's face, highlighting the small scar near his eye, the seriousness in his expression. They spoke quietly about the day's events, the petition from a group of Dornish merchants wanting lower tariffs, the progress in rebuilding sections of the city walls, the infiltration of small contraband rings that Tyrion suspected were smuggling stolen goods from the Reach. Mundane matters, yet they shaped the realm more solidly than any grand battle might. Then, as they shared a cup of spiced wine, Daenerys tentatively broached a subject that had hovered at the edge of her mind. "Jon, the lords keep pushing me about succession. They fear what happens if we die without leaving heirs. They remember the chaos after King Robert died, how the realm fractured." Jon's eyes flicked up, meeting hers. "A fair concern. But do you want to give them an heir? Is that what you desire, or is it just them?" She laced her fingers together, recalling the heartbreak of losing Rhaego, her first child, in Essos. She had believed herself barren, the dragons her only children. But the warlock's curses, the witch's prophecies, who knew what was truly set in stone? She had never consulted a maester to confirm. A part of her was afraid to hope. "I don't know if it's even possible," she admitted softly. "But if it were, I might want it." "Yes. I never thought I'd feel that way again. But seeing families rebuilt across the realm, seeing life continue despite so much death, it stirs something in me." Jon set his wine aside, reaching for her hand. "We could find out. Talk to a maester, perhaps. But only if you wish it." She considered, her heart pounding. "I don't want to bring a child into a realm that's on the brink of war. But maybe we're not on the brink anymore. Maybe we're on the brink of peace. That's worth protecting, passing on." She hesitated, glancing at him. "What about you? Would you want such a future?" A flicker of emotion passed over his face. He inhaled slowly. "I never allowed myself the thought before. I was a bastard of Winterfell, or so I believed. No future but the wall seemed possible. Then everything changed. If it's possible, if we can." His voice caught. "I'd want it with you." She closed her eyes, relief and uncertainty mingling. "Then perhaps we speak with a maester discreetly. No promises, no expectations. Just knowledge." He nodded, brushing his thumb across her knuckles. Rain tapped against the window, a steady cadence. "Whatever the outcome, I'm here. For you, for the realm, for us." She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. "You're too good to me," she murmured. "After all we've endured, I fear this might be just another dream that could be snatched away." He whispered back, "We won't let it be taken." In the hush of that moment, Daenerys felt the old scars on her soul ache less, replaced by a fragile but resolute hope. She recalled the vow she had made when she first took up the name breaker of chains, to free others from bondage. Now, she realized, she was also freeing herself from the chain of fate that had long haunted the Targaryens. The cycle of madness, the tragedy of stillborn heirs, the scourge of betrayal. Maybe this was the final link she had to break, her own fear of an unattainable happiness. Word that Daenerys Stormborn and Jon Snow were frequently seen together in private did not remain the realm's best-kept secret for long. Courtiers gossiped. Some claimed the two were merely allies. Others whispered of an affair. A handful speculated about more official union. Yet no open scandal erupted, largely because the queen radiated confidence. Her dragons circled overhead, and the realm had learned the cost of meddling in the crown's affairs too brazenly. Even so, as time passed, a mild tension built in the court. Daenerys sensed the growing expectation that she would make a declaration about her personal life. Meanwhile, she and Jon quietly pursued the idea of consulting a maester. They chose Samwell Tarly, who was now forging links in Old Town but remained a close friend to Jon. He was discreet, knowledgeable, and had once studied unusual medical texts. Through coded letters, they arranged for him to visit King's Landing under the pretext of assisting with archival research in the Red Keep's library. When Sam arrived, he was welcomed by Daenerys personally, escorted to a private chamber where they finally discussed the matter at hand. Sam was understandably flustered at first, caught between loyalty to Jon, awe of the queen, and the gravity of the question, whether Daenerys could conceive a child. He cleared his throat repeatedly as he examined the few documents Daenerys provided, old accounts of Mirri Maz Duur's curses, recollections of Daenerys's near-fatal childbirth in the Dothraki Sea. Then he explained that while curses and prophecies held some power in the eyes of the superstitious, the actual workings of fertility were governed by more tangible factors: health, age, injuries, nutrition. He proposed a mixture of potions to bolster overall health, along with a thorough examination, though he apologized profusely for the impropriety of such a procedure with the queen. Jon stood by, tension evident in his posture, as Daenerys consented to Sam's methods. "Anything that might give us clarity," she said, though her heart fluttered nervously. The idea of trusting her body to the care of a maester's hands after her experiences in Essos was daunting. Still, she believed Sam meant well. After several days of discreet testing and the administration of mild herbal tonics, Sam confided his conclusions. "I find no physical evidence that would render you unable to bear children, Your Grace," he said softly, meeting Daenerys' eyes. "What happened with Mirri Maz Duur's black magic was vile and unnatural, but from everything I've studied, that magic does not necessarily bind you forever. It's possible you've simply not conceived because you assumed you couldn't, and so you took no care either way." Daenerys sat very still, her mind reeling. She thought of the long years spent believing she was barren, of the dragon eggs as her only offspring. "Then it may be possible," she whispered. Sam nodded. "It may be. There's no guarantee, of course. But I see no reason to believe you're incapable." Jon let out a breath, placing a hand on Daenerys' shoulder. She felt the tremor in his fingers. Her own emotions were a swirl of relief, fear, wonder. "Thank you, Sam," she managed. "We appreciate your honesty." He rose, bowing awkwardly. "I'll keep your confidence, my queen. And if there's anything more you wish to know, I'll do my best." When he departed, Daenerys and Jon were left in a charged silence. She looked at him, heart pounding. "So it's real," she said, her voice hushed. "We can have a child if the gods or fate allow." Jon's face was a tapestry of joy and anxiety. A child and a realm to inherit. His gaze flicked downward. "You know that if word spreads of our union, my parentage could come to light. Questions about rightful succession might follow." She kissed his knuckles. "Then we'll navigate that as we must. I would name our child heir to the Iron Throne if the realm accepts it. And if not," she drew a breath. "We'll do what's best for the child and for Westeros. We won't let old fears tear us apart." He pulled her into an embrace, one that spoke of both longing and devotion. "I trust you," he whispered. "I'll stand by you, no matter what the realm thinks." She rested her cheek against his shoulder, letting hope surge. For the first time since she had lost Rhaego, she allowed herself to envision a future that included a family, an heir born not of violence but of a shared love. If their union was an echo of the old Targaryen ways, so be it. Westeros would have to judge them by their deeds. Daenerys promised herself they would give no cause for shame, no reason to revisit the sins of the past. It was a crisp morning in late autumn when Daenerys decided to address the court about her intentions. She summoned the lords and ladies present in King's Landing to the throne room. Word spread quickly, and soon the hall was filled with curious nobles, knights, and emissaries. She wore a gown of Targaryen black with silver accents, a subtle nod to her house colors, and the crown of Valyrian steel. Tyrion stood at her side, face carefully neutral. Jon Snow stood slightly behind, dressed in dark northern garb, his posture guarded but resolute. The atmosphere in the throne room was electric, as though everyone expected an announcement of great import. Daenerys' voice carried clearly in the vaulted space. "Lords and ladies of Westeros, you have served faithfully as we rebuild our realm. We have weathered wars, terrors, and internal strife. Together, we stand on the threshold of a new era, one of unity and prosperity, should we choose it. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the gathered faces. Many have asked about the succession, about how this realm will fare after my time. Rumors abound that I cannot bear children. Others say I might marry to forge alliances. I stand before you now to clarify my intentions. She reached for Jon's hand, drawing him forward. A murmur rippled through the hall. This is Jon Snow, she continued, voice firm. You know him as king in the north, as the man who fought beside me against the Night King. You have seen him stand for the living when all seemed lost. He and I share more than an alliance of armies. We share a bond of trust and devotion. I intend to take him as my consort. A collective gasp rose. Even those who had suspected a relationship between them seemed stunned by the public declaration. Daenerys lifted her chin. We do this not merely for ourselves, but for the sake of stability. If the gods grant us children, they shall be recognized as my true heirs. The realm shall continue under the House Targaryen line, strengthened by the ties we have forged across the north and the south. Tyrion stepped forward then, clearing his throat. Her Grace's decision marks a new chapter in our history. With the union of Daenerys Targaryen and Jon Snow, we bridge old divisions. Any who question this might recall that together they drove back the undead and overthrew a tyrant. Their rule promises peace, not subjugation. Daenerys could feel the roil of emotions in the room, shock, intrigue, perhaps some indignation from the most traditional corners. Yet no one dared speak openly against her. The memory of Dragonflame of the wars just past was too fresh. A hush fell, and then a few voices timidly broke into applause. Others followed suit until the throne room echoed with a scattered chorus of acceptance. She glanced at Jon, who offered her a slight, reassuring nod. Then she concluded, those who hold reservations may bring them before me in private, and we shall address them through reason and goodwill. Let Westeros see that we are no longer a land riven by petty feuds, but one that stands together under a just and united crown. Afterward, the lords and ladies filtered out, some wearing thoughtful expressions, others whispering among themselves. Daenerys knew the rumor mills would spin for days, questioning her choice of consort, her ability to bear an heir, or the king in the north's place in the line of succession. But she had confronted the matter directly. She had not spoken of Jon's Targaryen blood. One step at a time. For now, it was enough to declare their union openly and let the realm adapt. Jon lingered at her side by the Iron Throne as the crowd dispersed. You did it, he said quietly, a note of awe in his voice. She exhaled, a half-smile gracing her lips. We did it. Then, emboldened by the moment, she reached out and clasped his hand, ignoring any remaining onlookers. We stand together, always. He squeezed her fingers, silent affirmation. Beyond the tall pillars of the throne room, the sky was clear and blue, the storm clouds of the past having dissipated. And Daenerys felt, in that bright expanse, the promise of a future that might at last be free of old ghosts. A future shaped by compassion and unity, guarded by 3 living dragons and guided by 2 rulers who had faced the darkness and emerged with hope still burning in their hearts. In the weeks that followed, preparations for a ceremonial union began. Daenerys declared she did not wish an extravagant display draining the treasury, but the significance of the event demanded at least some pageantry. Courtiers set about planning a modest yet dignified ceremony to be held in the Red Keep's newly rebuilt courtyard. Musicians were hired, feasts arranged. Delegates from each region were invited, from the north to Dorne, so that the realm could witness the formal bonding of their rulers. The faith was consulted, a septon chosen to perform a blessing that would not overshadow the Targaryen traditions Daenerys might invoke. Jon insisted that the North remain part of this moment, but also preserve its distinct customs. Sansa Stark traveled south to represent Winterfell, accompanied by a retinue of northern lords. Arya arrived unexpectedly, appearing one morning in Daenerys's solar with silent footfalls, still wearing travel-worn leathers. She said little, but the subtle grin she offered Jon spoke volumes of her acceptance. Bran Stark, guided by a small escort, came as well, though his gaze seemed ever distant, lost in the visions of the 3-eyed raven. The Starks in King's Landing was a sight many never thought they'd see again, at least not as honored guests. On the day of the ceremony, a crisp late autumn sun shone over the capital. The courtyard was bedecked with banners bearing both the dire wolf of House Stark and the 3-headed dragon of House Targaryen, interspersed with other sigils from across the realm. A dais had been erected, with space for the bride and groom to stand before the septon and, to one side, a small pyre symbolizing Targaryen custom. Citizens crowded as close as they were allowed, while lords and ladies filled the arranged seats. The air crackled with anticipation. Daenerys wore a gown that combined the styles of North and South, a flowing skirt of gray velvet reminiscent of winter's calm, with intricate red dragon-scale patterns stitched along the bodice and sleeves. Her hair was braided and pinned with small silver dragons. She carried no bouquet, but she had a slender chain of braided leather in her hand meant to be placed around Jon's wrist in a symbolic gesture of unity. Jon wore a black doublet with red accents, echoing her house colors but still bearing a subtle emblem of the Stark dire wolf near his heart. He also wore a thick cloak of wolf fur draped across his shoulders, reminiscent of his northern heritage. Standing together, they were living embodiments of the words once prophesied, ice and fire intertwined. Music began, a solemn melody from a small choir. Daenerys walked forward unescorted, for she had no living male relative to give her away and she had never needed one. Tyrion, Missandei, Sansa, and Arya formed part of the small entourage on each side, while the Septon waited with a half-anxious, half-reverent expression. When Daenerys and Jon met at the dais, the hush among the crowd was total. Even the dragons, perched on the ramparts above, seemed to hold their breath. The Septon delivered a brief invocation to the Seven, praising the union of hearts that would guide the realm. He spoke of loyalty and mutual respect, the forging of a shared future. Then Daenerys, stepping outside the usual Westerosi tradition, turned to the pyre, a symbolic bowl of burning coals, and dropped a pinch of scented herbs, speaking in High Valyrian. "Blood of my blood, I bind myself to you, that our houses, our hearts, shall be as one." It was a gesture that harkened back to old Targaryen rites and perhaps to the Dothraki phrase. Then she held out the braided leather cord, wrapping it gently around Jon's left wrist, before entwining it with her own. The crowd watched with rapt fascination. Jon, guided by quiet sincerity, repeated words of pledge learned from the Septon but laced with his own vow. "I swear to stand beside you, to protect our people, to share the burdens of rule, and to honor you as my queen and my partner in all things." He secured the cord, tying it in a loose knot. For a breathless moment, their gazes locked, the crowd forgotten. The world was just them, a man and a woman who had fought the darkness and found each other's light. When the vows were done, the Septon pronounced them united in the eyes of gods and men. Applause thundered through the courtyard. The dragons roared from their perches, shaking the very stones with their cries. Daenerys felt tears prick her eyes. She had been a frightened girl sold to a Dothraki Khalasar, a breaker of chains in distant lands, a mother of dragons, a savior of the north, a conqueror of King's Landing. Now she was a wife in the sense that Westeros could comprehend, though she still thought of herself as a Khaleesi in her heart. She and Jon turned to the crowd, hands still bound by the leather cord, and the applause redoubled. Tyrion stepped forward, grinning broadly. "Long live their graces," he proclaimed. "Daenerys Targaryen and Jon Snow." A cheer rose from the assembled lords, echoed by the small folk at the edges of the courtyard. Sansa and Arya watched, the latter with a half-smile that hinted at genuine happiness for her brother. Grey Worm stood near the front, solemn but seemingly touched by the moment. Missandei dabbed at her eyes, the swirl of emotion overwhelming her composure. Bran stared with his calm, otherworldly gaze, as though seeing 1,000 possible futures unfolding. The wedding feast that followed was lively but restrained. Daenerys and Jon circulated among their guests, receiving well wishes from houses that once might have been enemies. Gendry Baratheon offered a respectful bow, acknowledging the peace between their lines. Yara Greyjoy downed ale and clapped Jon on the shoulder, quipping that the Iron Islands expected no less ferocity from a Targaryen consort. The northern lords who had journeyed south gave toasts to House Stark's bond with the Dragon Queen, referencing legends of ice and fire. Laughter mingled with conversation, and for an evening, the burdens of the realm felt light. As the sun dipped below the horizon, torches lit the courtyard, dancers filled the open space, and minstrels sang ballads of heroes and lovers. Daenerys sat with Jon at a high table, taking in the sight. She saw Tyrion exchanging banter with Sansa, presumably about the times they had once been forcibly wed. She saw Missandei and Grey Worm quietly holding hands in a corner, forging their own bond. She saw the swirl of color and motion as highborn and lowborn danced alike. It was not the extravagance of King Joffrey's ill-fated wedding, nor the tense splendor of Margaery Tyrell's day. This was a simpler, more genuine celebration, reflecting the tempered joy of a realm that had suffered too many horrors to trust blind revelry. When the revelries wound down, Daenerys and Jon slipped away from the crowd, climbing the steps to the Red Keep's ramparts. The city glowed below, torches lining the streets, a hush settling as the hour grew late. They leaned on the battlements, the autumn breeze crisp. Drogon soared overhead, a silent sentinel against the starlit sky. Jon rested his hand on hers. "Are you happy?" he asked, voice low and earnest. She turned to him, seeing the reflection of the moon in his eyes. Yes, she breathed. In this moment, I'm happier than I've ever been. No throne of swords, no chain of gold can compare to this feeling. He stroked her cheek, the roughness of his fingertips sending a thrill through her. Then it was all worth it. Every battle, every loss, every night we feared the dawn might never come. She nodded, pressing closer. We've carved out a new beginning. I can't promise every day will be easy. The realm still has scars and we'll have new challenges. But we'll face them together. He dipped his head, kissing her gently. The distant roar of a dragon punctuated the night, a triumphant echo across the city that once cowered under Cersei's rule. Daenerys closed her eyes, letting her senses fill with the warmth of the man she had chosen, the man who had chosen her. If some across Westeros whispered about the oddity of their bond, if they questioned the unraveling of the old ways, let them. She had broken chains before. She would break old prejudices too. In that tender, moonlit moment, the future felt limitless. 3 dragons soared alive and free, the realm breathed a collective sigh of relief after nightmares vanquished, and Daenerys Stormborn Targaryen stood at the pinnacle of her journey, not as a lonely conqueror, but as a queen united with a king who shared her heart's fire. Tomorrow would bring new tasks, forging laws, overseeing trade, ensuring no new threat rose from the shadows. Yet for this night, they simply held on to each other, content in the knowledge that they had shaped the realm's destiny for the better and had found, against all odds, a love that would guide them through whatever storms might come.